Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna da Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube, and the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars, A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast grim dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft, and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, the commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my home, welcome to the office, and welcome to Table Talk this evening. We have got, kind of a different kind of table talk, but in other ways, it's very much what table talk is. We're going to be talking about creating character empathy tonight. And specifically, Brianna da Silva is going to be leading that discussion because she's got lots of notes and a presentation and all of this. And she's been doing so well with the feedback that she's been getting on her screenplays. I guess she should know something about this based on that. So we're going to be taking a look at a passage writing screenplays that sell by Michael Hauge. And we've got Brianna, like I said, to lead the discussion, and then also Douglas A. Burton to chime in. Hello, both of you.
Hello.
Hey, everybody.
I just got back, back to back. I was just talking with Cameron, and when I told him I was coming with you guys, he wanted me to say that he senses love. So.
Great, wonderful.
Very cool. It's good to see everybody in the chat.
Yes, we got Sherry Lee, Tomocrat. Here's James Bacon. There's Sherry Lee. I just saw Robert show up in the chat. I don't know where Robert.
The core crew
a moment ago. Yeah. Oh, there he is, Robert. There's Robert. Hey, and Sable Phoenix is here, of course.
Awesome,
so, yeah,
man.
We got a great crew here.
The one who's been unmasked.
Yeah. And also the first thing we want to talk about, though, before we get into the main topic for tonight, is Doug, you were out in San Diego, and I know that James Bacon has just said Doug trying to beat out your romantic schedule from a couple of weeks ago. Fly to California, teach a seminar, fly back, do a stream. Absolute lunatics. Yeah. So tell us about, you were just out at the San Diego Writers Festival.
Yeah, I think he's cut it a lot closer from like airport, walk home, live stream. I had a little bit more of a break, but the San Diego Writers Festival was absolutely outstanding. It was a success, and it was the first time that I had talked about the Heroine's Labyrinth in an instructional way live, and it was a little bit of a different audience. This was older female audience. All but two were women, and so I was a little nervous because I didn't know. You just don't know, a guy talking about women in stories. There's definitely, I call it arms folded, legs crossed, is always the default position that I start with, and I have to kind of earn some credibility and build rapport before they're really with me on it. But it went great. These women were very hard to read. So it was in a classroom setting. So it was like I was up there. There was like the classroom was there, and I didn't even realize how crazy it looked until my wife showed me photos. I was like, "Oh my god, it's like I'm a teacher." But there was
you are a teacher.
Faces. So I was like, I don't know if I'm doing good or not, to be honest. But then at the end, when I was like, okay, this is the Q&A session, all the hands went up, and they were all like overwhelmingly positive. Awesome. Commentary and questions and like legitimate interest. And it was very, you start to get that rapport with the audience, and that's the best thing, because now you're like discussing things with them and considering things that they're throwing at you and giving you examples that maybe you didn't hear of before. So, similar like what we do here at Table Talk, except it was just a different group. And apparently good word got out. I had several people that I had not seen come over to the booth. They're like, I heard this was a great workshop. We want to buy the book. We sold a bunch of books. It was awesome. I had a great time in San Diego, and we had to turn around and come back. I had the kids and my wife, Crystal, with me. We went to the San Diego Zoo, came back, and we had a company come in. We had the solar eclipse in Austin. So it's been crazy. And then I had to work really extra hard yesterday and today to catch up with work. And then now we are streaming. So I barely had a chance to catch my breath.
That's awesome, though.
So I'm very glad that went so well for you.
Man, I me too, just because I think that, older women might be a very strong demographic in the target audience. And, it was important to me to be able to connect. You just don't know if you're going to be able to make connections, and, if they're going to buy into you. You just don't know. And I felt like that it all worked. And that was a big relief to me. And then also beyond the relief, you really get to know everybody. And it's exciting when you get to know people, and they're into the same things you are. That's awesome. So, and another little news flash. I won't say too much about it, but I finished Brianna's Dark Goddess, and it is really good. I can't wait to I'll tell her the things that I had thoughts on, but most of them were just questions. I would write a question, Brianna, like, does this mean this, or what is that? What happened to this, or whatever, and just for you to think about. But no major, no major criticisms of it. It's a very unique screenplay with very unique scenarios, and it wasn't what I was expecting. It was.
I hope that wasn't because I described it poorly.
Oh no, I think I just never read anything like it.
Oh,
it reminded me of Lovecraft, where the scale of things is much larger than you're used to. So
there's a lot of influence from this Hinduism, the massive scale that you find in that mythos.
That crossed my mind as well.
Yep.
Without a doubt. So anyway, and at some point we'll probably get a chance to talk more specifically about it, but I haven't had a chance to talk to Brianna yet either. So I wanted to let her know, hey, I finished it and it was excellent.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Yeah, Heath read an earlier draft, and I think I fixed all the problems that Heath had with it. I guess we'll find out later when I let him read it again.
Yeah, I'll read it again one day.
I read the first 30 pages that one time before I fell into an abyss of work, but I knew early on that it felt like it flowed much smoother.
Yeah, they were pacing
it was the same opening.
Yeah.
But it felt like it was all constructed, and it was much smoother to go right through. So
that's good.
I haven't had a chance to go side by side to compare what the changes were, but
don't worry about it.
Well, sometimes I like to see it, just as a writer, to see what the creative process looked like for you. Sometimes that can be fun.
Yeah, there were some very, very precise tweaks that were happening that to clear up a moment that was like dragging. And anyway,
Kess the Wanderer.
I can tell you about it later, but yes, Kess the Wanderer.
Yes.
Oh, I feel like I should tell the Table Talk audience briefly about my weekend too, because I also had an epic weekend. Not on the same scale as Doug's, I would say, because you were talking about your own book, but I got to talk about your book a little bit. It was awesome.
Oh, I got your text.
Yeah, I text you about it, but basically, for the benefit of the Table Talk audience, I went to a film industry fair here in Denver, which it was kind of like the experience of like a mini film festival without any films. So it was like watching a movie. It was just all the networking, all of the like panels and like education, the classes, workshops, stuff like that. So I met a whole bunch of people, learned a whole bunch of stuff. It was really cool. But there was one class I saw that was called In Search of the Heroine's Journey. I was like, well, I have to attend that. and so they were talking about like I don't know how to say her name, Maureen Murdoch. I have a hard time saying words sometimes. Maureen.
Maureen.
Okay, I can spell it, but the word anyway. So like it was that kind of stuff. And it was really cool. And at the end, I was like, could I also share a resource maybe? And they're like, sure. And I was like, so I have a friend, he wrote a book. And they're like, oh really? And they like pulled it up. They pulled your website up. And people were really interested, and they were thanking me for it. They're like, oh, that's really cool. So
awesome.
So a bunch of screenwriters are now hopefully buying your book.
That's great. Again, the goal is to help writers. So spread the word. I'm really hoping it leads to answers for people that may have been stuck in certain areas, like I was.
Oh, and the cool thing, wait, where is it? So I came home on that Saturday from that experience, and then guess what had arrived? What was on my porch?
Oh yeah,
perfect timing. Anyway,
that's awesome.
It's so pretty. It's a great
very
book.
Cool.
Nice texture too. I'm a as a book geek, I care about like the way a book feels, and I do approve of how yours feels. So I just wanted you to know.
Oh, good. Hey, that counts, man. Yeah, every which way to connect to a book is important.
For sure.
I remember in libraries, you ever just the pages, the smell of pages. I
love the new book smell. A lot of people like old book smell. I actually really love the new book smell. It's just like
we'll have to have an air freshener. New book smell.
The feeling of a new adventure that's unfolding before you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, obviously, lots of us should have that book now, and so one of the where I want to do some scheduling of Table Talk and let everybody know what's going to be coming to, because there's a lot of things to read, including that book. But we're going to do like the next major Heroine's Labyrinth live stream will be some kind of Q&A. I don't know when that'll be, but in a couple of months, another month, 3 months, something like that. Once everybody's had a time to read it and digest it and take notes, we'll do like a Q&A with Doug. So
that sounds fun.
Everyone should be reading that if they would like to participate in that. I've still got to read too, but then like Paradise Lost, I've been going through Paradise Lost. There are a lot. And
also this book right here.
And the City of Reckoning. That's right.
Oh,
so,
that's right.
We need.
I put it where you all could see it.
Nice. That's perfect.
that way, and Cameron's books. There's a lot of things to go through.
Sure.
We'll let people. I want to put something out so people know in advance, and then actually let people have time to read it and analyze it.
Well, and Brianna's book, it'll take a while. So maybe we should set a date
after
in the future.
I actually have a potential request on that. Maybe we can discuss it when we're not live, or we can discuss it. And I don't know if people want to know, but I'm going to be doing some promotions on it in June. So and some sales on the ebook.
April, May. Wow, so, that's quick.
All right.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I have enough time to read through it because it's not a quick read.
Well, I'll talk with you guys about that, and then we'll put it out to the whole crew here. All right. Well, Brianna, do you want to talk about what we are talking about tonight? Brianna's going to be leading this discussion tonight.
Sure. So I'll basically just kind of frame how I came to this material. So this book, I got it right here. It's called. Sorry, something just fell. It's called Writing Screenplays That Sell. It's by I don't ever know how to say his name, if it's Michael Hauge or Michael Hauge or Michael. I think it's Hauge, but I'm not positive.
Oh, is it Hauge? I'm sorry.
I don't know. You might be correct. So I say Hauge, but I think I've looked it up before, but I feel uncertain. So one of these days I need to get that confirmed. But he's one of those big Hollywood gurus. I think I first learned about him because of he has a really good breakdown of like the 3-act structure that has like 6 beats. Can't remember. It used to be my go-to before I really studied any other form of story structure. But anyway, I read this an earlier edition of this a long time ago. It was I'll include a random detail because it's kind of a fun story. The copy I had was from my dad when he was in college. And he had gotten it secondhand from someone else. So I was the third person. And it was like a really old edition. I don't have that edition anymore, sadly. But that one chapter I've always remembered. There's a chapter about character empathy or character identification. I think it might have said identification in the other earlier version. And basically what that means is that when you're watching a movie or show or reading a book, you need to feel something, whether it's positive or negative about characters. If you don't feel anything about them, you're not going to be engaged in what's happening, right? In most stories, it's going to be a positive thing. Like you have a hero where you want to care about that character. You want them to succeed. You want to be able to root for them. There are cases where you might have like a hateable character that you're just kind of watching in fascination. You're like, what are they going to do next? Like, I hate this person, but I'm intrigued. So that's another form of that. Or, loving to hate like a villain. Like that's another thing. You have a very strong emotion. Like we think about Joffrey. People hate that character, but you love hating him and you really enjoy like waiting for his comeuppance and then watching it come. And it's just like, yes. But yeah, in most cases, like it's what you really want to be thinking about is that character empathy. And I have found that so Michael Hauge in this chapter, he lays out like 8 different techniques with some sub techniques. And over the years, that has been my saving. Like I've used it as like a Bible, basically. I tend to write not very perfect characters. I like writing interesting people who have flaws. And sometimes my first draft of a story will be like too far in one direction and people hate the character. It's like, oh, like I make them too abrasive or whatever. And I end up taking these techniques and I always just kind of dial it a little bit. I'd be like, okay, wait, let me pull this in this way. And then once I do that and I get it quite right, then usually people do start to respond very positively to the characters. It's always worked for me so far. So, I wanted to share this. And it sounds like Doug might have some elements that he wants to add to or maybe disagree with too. So that'll be cool. Because I think there's more. I think what Michael Hauge has is kind of like, it's not the whole picture. There's another thing I thought of that's not in this presentation that I think should be added as another tool. But that's basically what we're talking about. How do we create characters that we feel something about, positive or negative, that we want to see their story? And that we're not checking out of the story, out of the narrative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you actually want to share your material if you're ready for that from your side? Because then I think you'd actually be able to control what we're looking at.
Yes. And let me see if I can do that.
That way you don't have to call for me to.
Let's see if I can do that in a way where I can still see my own notes. Let me see if I can do this.
Oh, okay. Well, if you can't, then I'll put my side up, and you can just call for a change of screen.
Oh, that's true. Let me try it. Let me try it. If I had time between us talking and me talking with Cameron, I would have tested this out beforehand before we went live. So apologize, everybody. Give me a second. So we're going to share screen. Now, if I just share a window, brilliant. Okay. And I'm going to presenter view. Oh, shit.
Nice.
Wait, what?
That may not let you see your stuff.
Oh, I do see my stuff though. Wait, that's so cool. Sorry. I don't know if you are you guys seeing it?
Yeah, we're seeing your. We're seeing the.
Oh, okay. I found a button that I didn't know existed. Great. All right. So this is a really shitty presentation. I didn't put any effort into in terms of its design. I say it's shitty because I'm a designer. It hurts me. But anyway, it's simple. It gets the point across.
It's classic.
Yeah, exactly. It's to the point. So we're gonna first start talking about character empathy, because there are some other elements of this as well. So basically, I guess I sort of already said this. We need to make them care about the character, and if they don't root for them, they're not going to engage with the story. They have to feel something, whether it's positive or negative, or else your story just doesn't work. People are going to forget about it. They're not going to care. Here's a secret. So it's possible to make audiences care about any character. And this is the fun thing. This is what's so powerful about this. You could have like an axe murderer type person. I mean, you can have just like, imagine the worst type of person. You could have character, like audiences will be rooting for them against in spite of themselves, Yeah, we've all experienced that. I remember what my youngest brother was talking. Oh, what's the name of that show? It's a guy, he's like a serial killer, but he only kills other serial killers. What is that show called?
Dexter,
yeah. He was talking, he said that he was talking about that show where he was like, I shouldn't be rooting for this character, but I am. I don't know why. I bet they're using these techniques, or at least similar ones. And it's almost like you're like just kind of manipulating people's emotions. That sounds kind of like a messed up, but it kind of does feel like it. Like when you do certain things, people respond emotionally, like they just do. We can't help it. Yeah, and and not always are you wanting for people to love a character. Sometimes you want them to hate them, like I was saying earlier. Like sometimes you need a villain that is like a black and white morality situation, and then sometimes you may even want audiences to feel indifferent. An example of that would be some types of horror movies, where it's like it's on purpose that you're kind of indifferent towards the characters. That way you can kind of casually watch them get slaughtered and you're not like, oh my God, I don't want them to, like, you can like weirdly enjoy it. Like there's a time when you want a precise emotion. You want people to feel a certain way about your characters, and you can choose that very intentionally. So I put the two techniques. This is not what Hauge has in his book, but to me, it helps me. Maybe it'll help other people to put them in two different categories. Basically, some of them have to do with relatability. So it's like, that character feels just like me. It's that feeling that you have when you have something in common with a person. You start to become friends because you're bonding over what you both relate to. So when you can relate to a character, that creates that certain closeness. And then there's also respect, the sense that you want to be like them. And that's like, you're kind of vicariously living through the character. So it's like, oh, I wish I could. So it's like a fantasy fulfillment kind of a thing, But both of these types of things, especially when they work together, are very strong for making you want to root for a character. Oh yeah. So there are 8 in this book. And he says the first 3 are essential. So basically, if you want people to root for your character, you have to use at least one of the first 3. Ideally, you would use 2 or 3 out of them. If you can use all 8, like that's like super powerful. Some of them won't work for every story, as you'll see. But yes, the first 3 are, like, according to him, the most important ones. All right, you guys ready to talk about them?
Yes.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. So first, creates sympathy. This is the most powerful one. It's also kind of the most overused, but it's because it is the most powerful. So basically, this is where you're inviting audiences to feel sorry for the character through some sort of undeserved misfortune. So it could be anything from, something extreme like, a child orphan that is starving or something like that, or it could be something really simple like, I love one of my favorite examples of, this is also falls into a different category too, but in the first Spider-Man, the one with Tobey Maguire, there's this super awkward moment where he waves to his crush. And he thinks she's waving to him, but she's actually waving to someone else. And I think everyone that watches it, you just cringe, you just feel his pain in that moment of like, oh, that's so awkward. But it's like that little moment, like just even little things like that make you feel connection with the character immediately. Because you're like, oh, they didn't deserve that. And that's kind of the feeling is, oh, I feel bad for them. Now, there is a caution. This is again my commentary here. I think it's possible to push this too far. So you don't want your character to be like pathetic. You don't want audiences to feel pity. You don't want them to be looking down at them like, oh, that poor person. You want them to feel, a connection on like an equal level. So
I'll add one thing to that.
Yes.
You're right. You don't want audiences to pity them or be like, oh, geez, that's pathetic. But you also don't want audiences to be like, there's like a solution and the character never comes up with it. They never solve it. They're always making the wrong choice. They're always like, if the character seems so dumb and you could think of a million ways to get out of the problem, you start to get irritated with the character and you can't relate to them because they're complete. It seems like they're just running. They're like that video game character that just runs into walls and jumps into walls. It just seems like it's a misfire,
That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Doug. That to bring up horror movies again, I feel like that's a problem that happens sometimes in poorly executed horror movies where they just make the characters so dumb they do things that no one would ever do.
It drives me nuts.
It drives you crazy. And instead of you're like, no, don't go in that door. And you should be having like a visceral like enjoyment of like, oh no, I hope they don't go in that door. But instead you're just angry and frustrated at the character.
Yeah,
and then
in fact, movies and shows or books where the character makes good calls and you're like, oh, good. Yeah. They're thinking like and then they get into trouble anyway. You're like, oh man, now I don't know where the story's going because the character's acting rationally and it's not working. It's the author's one step ahead of you despite otherwise reasonable behavior out of the character.
Yes. Could we bring up James Bacon's comment?
Yeah, I have something that goes along with what James says. But yeah, sure, we'll bring up what James says. James says, pity is okay. They just have to take an active role in overcoming their situation. They cannot be pitiable and passive about it. They have to take an active role, James Bacon says.
Yeah. So I agree with that. I was reading a book. It was in a writer's group. And the author was writing a story about a woman, and she was being so obviously manipulated by these guys. And I was like, it made me not pity her. Like Bacon said, like it's like I might feel like, oh man, that sucks that this really happened. But it was more like, dude, it's her own fault at this point, that she's still dating this guy. Like at some point, you just are like, she's behaving so antithetical to like everyone else knew the problem, but this character, it seemed like only the character was confused. I
can just say, I know you have to say something, Heath, but like I think both of these things fit into what I have at the bottom here underlined is that. So I put it in purple because it's color coordinated. I color coordinate everything. The purple traits are the ones that are connected with relatability, and so you need to balance this, I think, with traits that make us respect a character too. So that's why even if they are like, you're like, oh, poor thing. They are also taking an active role that makes you respect them more. You know what I'm saying?
That's true.
So what were you going to say, Heath?
Well, I think I was going to use the word capability, that the character needs to be capable. You guys went with James went with passive. Because James says pitiable and passive frustrates the audience. And yeah, passive is one thing, but whether or not you're talking about a character who is actually capable of doing something, but is passive and not, or you could have the same thing if you've got a character who's active, but they're not capable. You know that they're the subject. You feel sorry for them because they are the subject of undeserved fortune. But this person is also not capable. Like, even if they try to do something, that they're just not able to do it. So if you have some type of capacity with the character, that they're actually able to do something, and you know it, and they are doing things, but it's misunderstood. It's misunderstood, and therefore they are the subject of undeserved misfortune. That to me keeps the pity off of it. Because when I think of really pitying somebody, I think of, yes, feeling sorry for them, undeserved misfortune, and there's nothing they can do about it.
I like that. That's a really good point.
That's a good point. There's nothing they could do about it. You get a sense that it's a little out of their hands.
Yeah, and you might. I mean, sometimes you might want pitiable characters.
Yeah, you might. That's an interesting point. That maybe pity isn't quite the right word. It's just that you want to make sure that you can still, because the problem that you want to avoid is getting to a point where you lose sympathy, where you're instead of feeling like you're connecting with the character and you're rooting for them, that you're just kind of like. How do I put this? You're looking down on them, I guess. You know, you want to be
looking down, or like I was saying, like, it's on you. This is a character problem. You're
judging them for
like
it.
self-inflicted.
Yeah, that James says, I agree. Capable would be the opposite of passive in my statement. So according to James, that was the way to go. But I was thinking there'd be a difference. In my thinking, there's a difference between a capable hero who is passive because he's lazy. Okay, this person could go and do something, and a character who, like, I'm thinking about a pitiable character, right? That would be in Rabivania. They're like, okay, he's going to go and do something, but he's clumsy. I mean, he can't even do anything. So
that's balancing out with another trait we'll get to later, because that's making him likable for other reasons.
Well, pitiable. One just came. A great example came to mind. The movie Unforgiven. Clint Eastwood. He's falling off his horse. He can't mount his horse. He's falling into, and he's a pig farmer. He's falling into the feces. He's pitiful in the beginning of Unforgiven, and that sets you up, because the more layers you peel back, you realize this guy's the angel of death, and the pity was it was almost a disguise for this character. But that's an example of pitiable or pathetic behavior that actually sets you up in a weird way.
Here's a super chat from Robert. I don't know the answer to this question because I'm not.
I love that super chat right when I saw it.
Okay, so then Doug can take it. Robert,
Doug, take it, because I don't understand it.
Thank you very much. Robert says, is Quint's empathy in Jaws the Indianapolis?
I would say absolutely yes, because Quint, so you've got a clash of. This movie was made in 1975, I believe, 1974, 1975. And Quint represents like the old working class type of character, not college educated. He's a working man. And then you've got Matt Hooper, and they're both sailors. They're both seamen. But Matt Hooper's a college educated, high tech, rich boy. And then you've got the working class, old school Quint. And Quint is not likable. You first meet him by his claws on a chalkboard. That's going to piss off everybody in the movie theater. Thinking about it now drives me nuts. Yeah. He's antagonistic. He's unpleasant. He is quarrelsome and combative with all the characters, until that one of the best monologues ever. He tells the story about how he was on the USS Indianapolis, which is a true story, by the way. Japanese subs hit the ship. It was the ship that delivered the atom bomb. And it was a secret mission, so no one knew about it. No distress call was sent. It gets hit by a Japanese submarine and sinks quickly. 1,100 men go in the water. This is a true story, and sharks devoured these guys. Very few guys survived, and Quint, according to Jaws, was one of these guys. And suddenly, and it's a great monologue, because all these characters are dead silent while he's talking about it. And I feel like to this day, the audience falls dead silent when he talks about it. And then there's a scene afterward where he finishes up his monologue. He's like, well, anyway, I'll never put on a life vest again. And then there's a scene later when the boat is sinking with Jaws, and he gives the other guy's life vest, and he doesn't take it. And you know exactly where it is. But absolutely, you start to empathize with Quint, because he's lived the most horrifying nightmare of shark-infested waters that could ever exist. Anyway, I love that super chat.
That's an interesting example because it's like you start off as an unlikable character, and then you bring in some sympathy later and some empathy. Those words are annoyingly similar.
Yeah.
Remind me, because I forget, that character dies, doesn't he? Like
he does die. He's very hard to like, but everyone still ends up kind of liking this guy because you realize he's the one who went into the jaws of, or I didn't even mean to do that. He's the one who went into the nightmare, the worst possible nightmare of shark attack. And it was real in terms of history. And he's the one who goes down fighting the shark, so there is something about this guy that happened.
Because otherwise, if they just kept him in the unlikable, obviously, then that we wouldn't have felt that. But
to James's point, and Heath, I actually think Heath's point, he's capable. You may not like him. He's very off-putting. He's antagonistic. He makes terrible liquor. He shares one with the chief, drinks it and spits it out. There's so much not to like about this guy, but he's capable. And what's interesting is Matt Hooper, the college-educated guy, he's also capable. And there's a great moment later in the story where and Chief Brody is not capable. He is not capable on the boat, and he ends up being the unlikely hero. But both capable men, the educated man and the working man, run out of answers. About 2/3 of the movie in, they're like, "Well, what do you got?" There's no more answers. This shark is above both of their pay grades.
Cool. Any other comments on this one, on the first one? This is the biggest one, right? Like if you're telling a very short story and you want to make someone feel something about a character really quickly, this is your go-to. Just don't do it heavy-handedly, but give us a little bit of sympathy, make us feel a little sorry for a character. Like if you only have time to do one, that's the one.
Well, actually, Jaws is a good example for creating sympathy in a different way too. Matt Hooper is introduced. He's the college he's short. He's kind of edgy and, New Yorker-ish. And he's on an island with like the salty seamen of this, fishing community. And they're all teasing him and making fun of him. And, they're, almost like a bunch of bullies. And he's like, I don't want to get beaten up for. So that creates sympathy for that character.
For sure. Yeah, that's a really good example of that.
Yeah.
All right. How do I get back to this? Okay, there we go. So number 2. Number 2 is to put your character in jeopardy. So this is another one of those that is like you can kind of do quickly. Not as powerful as the first one, but it can still be pretty powerful. You're basically just inviting audiences to worry about the character. So they're leaning forward. They're paying more attention because they're in danger. They want to make sure that they're going to get out. Especially if this is combined with, other things that make us like the character, right? And for this, it doesn't have to be like life or death, right? Like depending on what type of story you're telling, you don't have to have a character running for their life. It could literally be like they're about to ask someone out, someone they really care about, and they're really nervous. All right, there's a certain jeopardy there because it's like, oh no, what are they going to get rejected? Or are they going to be hurt by this? It could be something like that. Someone's about to take a really important test. Like depending on what kind of story you're telling, just anything like that can create that effect where you're paying more attention and you're rooting for I want this person to survive, to succeed, because you can tell that they really want to. So any notes or thoughts on this one?
Well, I thought that starting in Mens Rea was in the middle of the action. When I was looking that up,
Immediate Rasa.
Maybe that's it. Okay. It's because it was telling me this is about criminal defense or something. But this sounds like starting in action. You might be able to do this if you starting. And you're talking about moving fast. If you have to pick one.
To that principle too.
If you start in the middle of the action, you might immediately open the story with a scene with your main character in jeopardy.
Yeah, it's very easy to do these top 3 instantly. Yeah. Like you could do these top 3 in less than a minute and several lines of dialogue. Like it says, it doesn't take a lot to put these in, or you could put more complex versions.
Yeah, I think if you start with a character in jeopardy, the action tropes are probably very useful because at that point you don't know the character. You're just like, whoever this person is, I hope they get out of it, and hopefully the character, especially in film, exhibits some sort of likability. You know, they're
Yeah,
making
you combine
quips.
some other thing with
Yeah.
Jeopardy. That's often enough. Like that's usually plenty. Something that you respect. We'll get to some more of these later, but you know, they
Well,
have
and
a
even
good sense of
thinking-
humor or whatever. You know, like they're really competent, and something else, and they're in Jeopardy. You're like, that's enough.
Even sticking with Jaws, Chief Brody, you know, he doesn't like the water. He's scared of the water. And, you know, there's that funny line early in the movie where they're like, we all know about you, Chief. And he's like, you don't go into the water. And then he's like, it doesn't make sense for someone who hates the water to live on an island. But what do they do with Chief Brody? They put him on a boat. They put him out in the ocean with the world's deadliest shark and two, you know, experienced sharkers who come up short. And it's Chief Brody who's the last man standing. It's, I mean, it fits this model. But unlike the pure action opening, I think that Heath was talking about, this is where you start with a character who you get the sense that he's a police chief in the safest town in the world. You know, he's specifically never in jeopardy. And then you slowly move him into the most jeopardizing situation you can imagine.
Yeah, that's true. All right. And then number 3. So this is the third of the most powerful ones. So make the character likable. So he has 3 different elements of this, and I think there's a lot more you can add, and I have some of them on the screen. So first, you know, just like have the character be kind, good-hearted, a good person, basically, generous. I think this is related to something in a different book, Save the Cat, which is such a great phrase. It's basically just like, it's like a very quick shortcut to making us like a character is have them show kindness. They save a cat out of a tree, right? They you know, they're taking care of an animal, or they help a, you know, older person down the street, whatever. It's something, they do some little act of kindness. That goes a long way. Again, you can do that very quickly at the beginning of a screenplay, for example. Number 2, show them being well liked by other characters. This is actually a more complex technique than it may seem at first. There's a lot to this that I want to say. Oh, wait, sorry. I should go back to, well, never mind. I already started my sentence. So I don't want to get confusing, because basically what you're doing is you're playing into, you know, we're social animals and we take social cues from other people. So the whole phenomenon of, you know, you see 2 different restaurants, one of them has a longer line than the other, and you're like, more people like this one, I guess I should find out what's so good about it. You know, like we're or, you know, you see lots of reviews, so that makes you want to buy something more. You see, you know, someone already has lots of followers, you're more likely to follow the person with more followers. Like all these things we're just subconsciously following, you know, what are other people doing? And so you can tap into that by having a character that is well liked by other characters, especially, and this is great for side characters, if those other characters are characters we already like. So it's this concept called like transference. That is a really good time saver for shorter form stories, but you can use it in any story. If you've spent a lot of time using all these sorts of techniques, making us really care about one character, we really like this person, really respect them, and then we see that person that we already like cares about someone else. We care about them because they care about them. You know what I'm saying? And so like if that other person were something happened to them, we would feel something because we would be like, oh no, that was this other person's best friend. Or like, you know, we just feel like we should root for that person because someone else roots for them.
Well, that's a great point. In fact, I think you see that a lot in large group dynamics and shit, like in Aliens, for example. You know, the way the Colonial Marines all talk to each other when they're first introduced. You know, there's that scene where Hudson is like, "Hey, Vasquez, have you ever been mistaken for a man?" And she's like, "No, have you?" And and then Drake, who's like the tough dude, he's like the guy that all the guys are like, "Man, this guy's the a-hole that we all like." He's the one who's like, "Vasquez, you're just too bad." And then she slaps him, and he just smiles at. You like both of those two right there, and they both seem tough and like they can handle their business, and they like each other, and that just builds those two up right away.
Oh, thank you for giving that example. I love the fact that you brought up one where they like each other. I never thought about using it in that way too. Which is like it's a feedback loop, but now we just like everybody here.
But again, to Heath's point, you get a sense that both are capable. And once you have that, they're not like sycophants. They're not like, oh, we just like you. Like two people who probably don't like a lot of people. They like each other and they look like they can handle their business. It really builds up. Your screenplay has some of that with Dark Goddess.
Yes, we definitely have. This is a story where the characters are already powerful when we meet them. And I have this one, the little green asterisks on the side is because this is on the level of respect, right? Like these are things that make us look up to a character, and not just be like, oh, I can relate to that. Hopefully we relate to characters that are good people, but there's more of an element of like, oh, that embodies something that I want to be, and so that's a really good other type of trait to have. The third one is a sense of humor. And this is weird to me because I noticed that this edition, he words is actually differently than the edition I read from the 90s or whatever, from this older edition.
Really?
Because he very clearly said in that one that to have a sense of humor doesn't necessarily mean that they're funny, that the characters could be funny, but it also just means that like, and I like this, I wonder why he changed it, because I really like making it broader. Because in the current edition, he just says that they're funny. Like you could have a terrible person who's just like mean to everybody, but they're funny. And that kind of makes us enjoy the character. It kind of, in a way, depending on the genre. Like if that character makes us laugh, it almost can make up for a certain level of terribleness. But he was in the older edition, he said that, and it could be also that they just have a good sense of humor about their environment. So like bad things are happening and the character isn't losing their cool. In other words, like they are able to kind of laugh about the situation. They're able to be like, everything's going to be okay. Like them, I guess having a good attitude is kind of another element, which I think is true too. Because that also makes me respect a character. It's like,
well, there's also like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I don't know if you've ever seen that with Michael Caine and Steve Martin. They're despicable. They're dirty, rotten scoundrels, but they're hysterical. So
yeah, that's
end up liking them anyway.
Right. If it weren't for the humor, you wouldn't be rooting for that character.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. So it does seem like if you say this person has a sense of humor, oftentimes I might not think that they are necessarily a stand-up comedian. That's not what that is, but that you appreciate the jokes of others.
Yes.
And that you find humor in your situation and don't take it too seriously or something like that. I think how that could go. Yeah.
So that's why I wrote sense of humor instead of that they're funny, because that's how he worded it in his older edition. And I like that broader thing.
So he updated it to.
He updated it and just made it say that they're funny. And I was like, but I like.
Oh, the new one is funny. The old one was sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he updated it to funny.
Way better.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why. It seems like that's more, because I think it's true. I think that broader sense, to me, seems accurate. And I added at the bottom some other things for that number one trait about making them likable. Like I would add other admirable traits to that. Like there are ones that I've used very intentionally, like where like I was writing a shorter story and I didn't have a lot of room, but I needed you to feel a little bit more about this character than this other character. And so there was one case where I made this character do something very brave and sacrificial, where he was letting these other it was like I guess kind of a masculine thing where he was getting in the way of danger of these female characters, and that made you just kind of be like, oh, I look up to this guy, like he's doing the right thing. He's putting himself in danger to make sure that they're safe. So that's not this on the same level as, like, that's not the same thing as being kind or good-hearted. I guess it is good-hearted, but I think that's worth pointing out, that like anything else that you would admire. So that could be another one would be them having respect for themselves. Like I think I respect a character who respects themselves. So yeah, just anything that is like a likable, respectable trait, I would say falls under this category.
And that takes some skill to write, because you have to understand the language of courage, for example, or like sometimes if you're dealing with capable characters, like for whatever reason, that's just completely auto-populated. Armageddon, all the characters are they're designed to be likable for whatever reason. And sense of humor is a big part of why each character is meant to be likable and all that. But they also have to be heroic. And they in Armageddon, they kind of went with like working class guys, so you have to know what a rig you'd have to know how to work a rig in order to get some of these scenes right. So anyway, like there's some skill level in making your characters believable, which I believe if your skill is up to it and you know what you're writing about or you know what you're talking about, your ability to transfer that knowledge to your character makes them interesting to other people as well, because they just seem to know what's going on in an arena that maybe you don't. You've never seen what it was like to work on an oil rig, for example.
So actually, since this is the last of the big three,
Yeah.
why don't you address what Sable just said right here? Sable said, I would say making the character likable is the most powerful of these techniques. So then why is it sympathy? So why is creating empathy?
I'm sure that's subjective. I feel like there are some things that I will get to later where I don't even agree with his order. Where I'm like, there's some things that he put lower on the list. I'm like, I feel like that's really powerful. I think some of this may actually really depend on audience. Individuals, we may respond more to some versus others. I think potentially I would make my guess as to why he puts sympathy first. I don't know because I'm not him, but
Relatability, right?
Yeah, it's I think just because the emotional intensity of that can be really, really strong, of like just seeing something devastating, just something really negative happening to a character, that can kind of pull you in a more like almost violent way. That's why I say you shouldn't use it in a heavy-handed way. Like it's possible to overdo that. Whereas making character likable, it doesn't have that same like. It doesn't have that level. Like it's not something you can overdo. In other words, I don't think you can overdo making a character likable. I don't know. I have no idea why he.
Yeah, I think you can. The Mary Sue is famous for being.
Well, that's not likable though.
Yeah. Let me repackage it.
Yeah.
Part of the problem with the Mary Sue character is that, and it could be a he too, he or she. Is overly liked by all the characters in the show. Like they're immediately.
I see what you're saying. Actually, I think I agree with you. Yeah.
Right. So like and I think this ties into what we were saying before. If all the characters like, we like you, we like you, we like you, and they're not even competent or it's just freely given. Sometimes that could be a turnoff because that's just never how it is in real life. Like in real life, you have to earn respect. You have to earn that sort of response from everybody. And I don't know if anyone knows, the term Mary Sue came from Star Trek fan fiction. This person wrote a character named Mary Sue who joined the Starfleet crew, and like Kirk was all cool. Like all the characters liked her like immediately. And the problem was that she had not earned her way into this crew, that she had just kind of been immediately accepted into this crew, and it became problematic and it made her unlikable. To your point, Brianna.
Well, I think you've convinced me. I think we can put both of these on the same level because they're both on the two different types. This is why I find it helpful to categorize them into two different buckets. Because if you're getting to the point where you're going too far in the sympathy, you need a respectability type of trait to balance it out. And with this, if they're getting too far into the respectability and they're becoming a Mary Sue, you need to go into the relatability element. And that's
I think you just nailed it right there.
That brings them down to your level.
We're going to call that the Brianna scale. Because I'm telling you, a lot of the heroines that I don't like in modern stories have the likability problem, and they're missing the respectability issue that you just said. That's a great little.
We just had an epiphany here.
I think so. Well, that was a really concise, and this is why I think that's so valuable. That's why I want to give it a name, because it was a concise and easy to understand scale that makes immediate sense to me when I think about it.
Well, I want to look at what he's saying, what Michael Hauge is saying. He's talking about this is his rules for creating empathy. And so he's saying that empathy means the audiences and the readers identify with the character and experience emotion through that person. If the character is in danger, you want the audience to feel frightened. If the character suffers loss, the audience feels sad. So that's the goal. To get the audience to experience emotions through this character. And then he says the three most powerful methods for establishing this identification are listed below in order of priority. So let me just think about another person, not a character. If I'm just thinking about another person and I'm supposed to be really feeling the emotion that they are feeling, there are a lot of people that I like who I don't start feeling their emotion when they're sad or they're having a bad day or whatever. I mean, but because number one is create sympathy for the character. And he does say this is by far the most effective and widely used method for creating reader empathy with the hero. If you can get the reader to feel sorry for your hero by making her the victim of some undeserved misfortune, you will immediately establish a high degree of identification with that character. And I think if I'm just thinking about other people in life, yes, I'm probably most likely to feel that person's emotion if I feel sympathy for that person rather than if I just like them. Because to me, I got a large net of people who I like. All right, I like all these people. Do you like this person? Yeah, I like this person. But do I actually feel sorry for them?
I do think it's worth pointing out that the way we react to real people is different from how we react to characters. I feel like we're in a different mindset. Like there's a little bit more of like we're opening up ourselves more to being drawn in. Like we're kind of like letting ourselves be vulnerable when we're like sitting in a movie theater or we're sitting, it's in front of the pages of a book where we want to be brought in. We want to feel something. And if what we're given is off-putting, it makes us kind of angry in a sense, it's easier to be irritated. Well, I guess it depends. I was going to say it's easier to be irritated by a character than a real life person. It completely depends on what the level of irritation is. Because there are certain things that if we're interacting with a real person, we can forgive it in a character if we're able to see more into their inner life, if we're able to see more into the things that make them relatable.
I think the empathy part is a little bit more powerful. And I was just trying to think of an example. Like if someone who you really like they're going to move. Do you want to help them move? I like the person, but I ain't going to help them move. Or if you find out that they just gave their last paycheck to orphans, and because of that, they're being evicted, you're like, you know what? I am going to help this person move because you're feeling invested in this person. So you'll actually help them move. You'll inconvenience yourself. But if they're just likable, that may not be enough for the call to action.
Yeah, that's a good point, guys. Yeah.
But being likable still counts. I do think that being likable is a little overrated. I feel like very avant-garde writers are like, I'm going to make a character who's completely unlikable, and you're still going to like them. I feel like that's almost like a writer, like protest style character, like the anti-hero,
Right, and I think it's important to note, since we're talking about character likability, it is not necessary to have a likable character to have an interesting one you follow. It's not none of these traits that we're discussing are necessary. It's just that the more you have of them, the more empathy you will feel towards that character. Like the more you are executing those things well and balancing them together, which is my addition to what he describes, the more empathy people will have. But there are situations where you may want an unlikable protagonist who, like we've talked about, some like where they're funny like that. I mean, I guess that makes them likable. This is kind of a weird one because maybe that's not the best way to put that, but like you can have other traits that can compensate for that, as long as you're still rooting for them.
Yeah. I think you have to buy into them on some level, something that holds you there despite the unlikability.
Yeah. So you competence. Yeah, if they're unlikable, you gotta bring up some of these other traits.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of characters like the unlikable male who's very competent. What am I thinking? House. Remember House MD? In fact, there's a million of these characters who are like completely off-putting, but they're really good at their job. Steve Jobs, I think of as that kind of an archetype,
Should we go to the next one? Do you guys have anything else you want to say on this one? I think we got it. I guess that's a yes. All right. Oh, that brings us so perfectly into number 4. Make the character highly skilled.
Yeah.
Which is another way of saying make them capable, make them competent. We've been saying this a lot, that this is another really big one. I didn't put any other notes because I feel like this one's almost self-explanatory. Like, obviously we respect. It's got the green star. That means it's a respect category. That we respect someone that's good at things, because it's like, oh, that would be cool if I was good at things like this person. I don't really feel like there's even not much more to say on that, but what do you guys think?
Well, like Top Gun Maverick, He goes in and does the thing to save their lives, really is what he's doing. I think the skill level is captured in the speed, film-wise. The fact that he's going so fast, the fact that no one else had passed this, suddenly you get a sense that he's highly skilled. Like that was a defining moment. Maverick's already an established character. He reestablished himself in that sequence as the most skilled pilot of the crew, So yeah, I think the competency, I zeroed in on that a long time ago. It's important and it's hard to sell. You have to be able to sell the audience on the skill. If the character I think Rey from Star Wars is a famous example of a character who gets a lot of crap because she was good at all these different things and she had not really had any training. And so they just never took the time to sell you on the skill. And as a result, there's kind of I'm not buying, no one bought it. No one quite believed in the skill level.
That's a really good note. The addition thing is that highly skilled, but there should be some level where it's earned. Even if we don't watch a training montage where they become we have some sort of backstory that explains why they have the skills they have.
Yeah, and or even an actor who can pull it off. I believe it or not, like Indiana Jones and like that. One of the reasons I thought Harrison Ford was so interesting for Raiders is he wasn't very athletic. And then he would still make these ridiculous jumps, and he looked like, he was heavy and he would land, and he wasn't very, and I was like, but he's still doing it. And you're like, man, this guy, you get a sense that he may not be an athlete, but he's operating at the highest possible level, and he's got the courage to do the big jump. And then the filmmaker had to show us that, and that sold us on his abilities and skill level. So I think, you have to be able to sell either a reader or a viewer on the skill level. And if you can do that, I think your audience will stay invested.
When you're
montage,
Maverick in Top Gun is okay. Even the original Top Gun. I mean, when Maverick shows up in the original Top Gun, he is highly skilled. Actually, that's a great point. Let's contrast these two. Maverick in the original Top Gun, he is not. In the very beginning, he is not. In the very opening sequence, he is not. You do not create sympathy for him, which is the opening sequence, as in when they are in the planes. Because it opens with them in the planes. But then, after they get out of that, so that's several minutes later, he's berated for his action by this superior officer, and
that's relatable.
So
you're with the principal's office.
He was heroic, and he tried to save this guy, but then he got berated for that. So that does cut. So I would guess that is creating sympathy. That comes in a little bit later. He was in jeopardy in the very beginning because he was in a hostile situation. He clearly has a sense of humor. And he saves the cat. So even though he's kind of he's a jerk, right? He's a jerk.
He's a hothead, yeah.
He does have the sense of humor with he and Goose, but he does save Hollywood. So he does save the cat because Hollywood can't make it back, and so he goes and saves Hollywood, and then he is in jeopardy, and he is highly skilled. Okay, so actually, I got you, James. Just 1 second. So that's very interesting there, because in some sense, Maverick is not on the hero's journey, perhaps. He's not he's not the farm boy. He's already a naval aviator on the cusp of going to Top Gun.
Right.
So it's not his origin story. We're not doing
correct.
But I was also thinking, I was contrasting that as Brianna was talking with Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon, which we are starting from, close. When you were thinking about make the character highly skilled, I was thinking again of what Lou was talking about, and I forget where he got this from because I don't think it originated with Lou, but Lou was talking about it, where you start with as being almost a hero. You start with almost a hero. So how do you get your farm boy to be highly skilled? If you are doing the origin story and you're going on the hero's journey or whatever, does that make sense for the character to be highly skilled? Well, according to one sense, it does, because the hero can be highly skilled at something that is unappreciated in his home environment. And I think this is what Hiccup is. We
like
love
bullseyeing womp rats.
like bullseyeing womp rats. Luke is a fantastic pilot, but that's not appreciated on the Moisture Farm. Hiccup in How to Train Your Dragon, create sympathy. Yes, you feel sorry for him. He is the subject of undeserved misfortune at the beginning of that. Absolutely. He is in jeopardy because they are under dragon attack at the very beginning. He is definitely likable. He's saving people. He's well liked by some of the other characters, and he has a sense of, his narration tells you he's got a sense of humor. He's not well liked by like his dad.
He also has mechanical skills that are undervalued in the warrior society.
That's exactly where I was going then. He clearly has a sense of humor about his environment because he's narrating and in a comical way, but then make the character highly skilled. He is also highly skilled because he's a highly skilled mechanic. And all of those four things, which is not appreciated in the Viking world.
It's devalued, right?
Devalued. But that one does hit. I will see if it hits the next four. It'd be interesting to contrast Maverick and How to Train Your Dragon. Because or Top Gun. I was thinking of the original Top Gun with the character Maverick, and How to Train Your Dragon because they are so different. So
those are fantastic examples. Thank you, Heath.
James Bacon for $5. Thank you very much. Says James for $5 says they need to be competent from the jump, but they need to earn their capability. Unearned capability is roundly rejected by the audience. It's cheap.
Well, a great example, Clarice Starling. They show her at the FBI Academy. They show there's a lot of there's the boxing thing, and she's got to hold her own with these other guys. There's that scene where she comes in and the guy's like, "Bang, you're dead, Clarice." He's like, "You forgot to check the corners." And then at the end, she turns around and she guns down Buffalo Bill in the dark. She's earned the moment because we've seen her struggle through the training process. We know that she cares and she's sculpting her skills. So when the moment comes, she delivers, and we believe her. We believe that she was able to do that.
Absolutely. So many great examples. This is a fun conversation already, guys.
Yeah, this is a different way to go about it than we normally do because we've done some books like this, but this is interesting that we've got different examples of all different kinds of movies and stories that we've talked about.
I know.
I've also noticed that unlike Truby, where this seems to be a little bit more useful, maybe like we're less resistant to it.
Oh yeah, this is a really good one. I need to reread the whole book. So I don't remember the rest of it, but I remember it being a good one. So
yeah, I remember Heath got hostile on which
on Truby. Yeah, I should say I'm about halfway through Truby's book, The Anatomy of Genres. I'm becoming less and less impressed with it as I go. So I just wanted to share that with you guys.
Well, interesting, very interesting. Yeah, my thing was, I know he's smart. I know that there's nuggets in here, but I felt frustrated on every page. I felt something that I was like, well, that's contestable. That's contestable. So I could never sink into the book. Like this is a little bit more general. And it's when we test out the ideas by bringing up examples,
it applies.
It seems to hold up. It's holding up.
It really does. Like I said, I've been using this. Like this is a set of techniques that I feel like I've used more consistently, more frequently than any other. Like that's like these are well-used tools in my toolbox.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. And then so number 5, this is another fun one to discuss. So putting the character in touch with their own power. So this goes into the respect element. This is something that you're going to live vicariously through the character. There are 4 different types of power that he describes. So one is power over other people. Kind of self-explanatory, someone who's like a leader in some sense. 2 would be the power to do what needs to be done without hesitation. This is a really cool one that is very respectable, where a character, they come into a situation, they see what needs to be done, they execute it, they take care of it. It's like that, just like we instantly respect that so much, because a lot of us can relate maybe more to the character who's more anxious or, is more like, I'm overwhelmed. What do I do? And so when we see someone that is just, this also is a form of competence, I would say too. Like they're able to just do what needs to be done in the situation. It's like, yes, I think all of us want to be like that. And hopefully all of us are like that sometimes, but, and then number 3, this is an interesting one to me that I wouldn't have thought of on my own, is like the power to express one's own feelings without like, how do you put it? He had a longer way of putting this. Oh, goddamn it. I had the
Jane Eyre.
What's that?
Have you ever read the book Jane Eyre?
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorites.
I believe her sacred fire was her ability to express herself. The author goes out of her way, Charlotte Bronte goes out of her way to say that Jane is plain. She's plain. She's not very pretty. She's very ordinary. And I think the reason the author did that was for us to kind of downgrade the impact of her beauty on other people. You know, so we're like, okay, she's just a regular. But when she speaks, it's the most compelling and mesmerized. Like, even as a reader, you read her comments, her thoughts, and her ability to express herself. It's mesmerizing. And I was like, wow, Jane Eyre's Sacred Fire is this self-expression, her language. So when I right away when I saw number 3, I thought of Jane Eyre.
I'm just going to read his paragraph on this because I think it's good. So it's power to express one's feelings regardless of others' opinions. That was the second part that I couldn't remember. This principle is often tied to the character's humor and is illustrated by many of Jack Nicholson's roles besides Melvin Udall. I don't actually know how to say that. Well, he just gives some examples, but he's saying like there's the power of their undiluted emotions. Such power is irresistibly seductive to all of us who worry about even raising our voices. You know, a character who just, there's so many times in society, I feel like, where it's maybe not socially acceptable to say exactly what we think, you know, or there's times where you have to like be more careful, or you're trying not to hurt someone's feelings, blah, 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 blah. When we see a character that is just saying it as it is, or they're able to express themselves without fear, like we respect that, because it kind of embodies something that we all want to be, but we can't always be, just because of what it's like being a human. Right. And so that is like that's a power fantasy.
Well, because there's social consequences to speaking your mind abruptly, and characters who seem to be immune from those consequences are absolutely captivating. In fact, when by the time you get to the Beast as Ally chapter in the book, that is actually part of what makes the Beast as Ally attractive to the heroine. Not necessarily sexually, although it could be for sure. There's something unexpectedly honest and authentic about that. And that is what makes that character worthwhile.
I love that. And then number 4, of course, is superpowers. And he mentions that superpowers are more, superheroes that are more effective if the character starts off ordinary in that relatability space, right? And then they gain those powers. And we'll come back to talking more about this later, because that's one of those, well, I guess we could talk about it a little bit right now, but that's one of those dial tweaks, right? Like we talked already about how unearned power unearned abilities is something that we may not buy, but you can use that feeling, that resentment that a lot of writers create by accident when they're trying to create a good character and they create an you. You can do that on purpose for a character that you want people to dislike, which we'll get to later. You give someone power and they shouldn't have it, or they get it too easily or too cheaply, and you resent them for it. So hold that thought. We're going to come back to it more later. But yeah, basically, in general, someone with power, it creates a sense of fascination and a sense of we want to live through them. You know, it allows us to experience a fantasy.
One trick is if you're writing and you feel like, and sometimes you want to do this on purpose. I did it in Faraway Birdie. If your character has some ability or innate quality that's causing them to excel, build that up a little bit to where, and then take it all away. So you can actually, in fact, even in the book I'm writing now, I felt that one thing came too easy. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to leave it in there as too easy. And then I'm going to have this other character completely outmaneuver Theodora. So if your character is getting something unearned or something's a little too easy, sometimes you can leave it in there and work with that, because you're setting them up for a fall later. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that because this has been on my mind lately.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
I was going to use our 2 examples of Maverick from.
Go ahead.
So I think so. You could say that Maverick has power over other people, because that's the power. Because he's got power over the enemy. Like, you know, he'd shoot them down and kill them. So you could say perhaps there a little bit. Now he's also an officer, but you never really see in his in that he's the low guy on the totem pole. So maybe there's a little bit of that in there, being an officer and then also the ability to kill. But I would say that the opening scene gives him the power to do what needs to be done without hesitation. Even though he's running out of fuel, he goes back for Hollywood. So I would say that would be clearly manifest. And I think that probably with Hiccup, it might even be the same thing. Because he goes and grabs. It's a little bit different because the other Vikings are definitely going out there and fighting. So he's not like, it's not like Maverick where everybody was trying to call him back and he goes anyway. Everybody's going out there and fighting, but he knows that he can go out there and take out one of the dragons, and he goes out there and does that without hesitation. So I think it's number 2 in both of those cases.
That's good. All right, number 6. Place your character in a familiar setting. So this is an interesting one because obviously you can't do this for every type of story. If you're writing a science fiction epic set on Mars 500 years from now, that's not going to be a familiar setting. But there is something true about the fact that like when there's something about the culture that they're in that you can relate to, you feel closer to it. Now, what I think is another interesting note here, that again, he doesn't put this in here, but I think it's important that when you are dealing with unfamiliar settings, like you are automatically there's a little bit of distance. It's not necessarily a lot, but there is a little bit of distance the audience immediately feels from the characters, and you have to compensate for it, in my opinion. So you may, when you're writing some sort of speculative thing, or even you're just writing something that's in a culture that most of your viewers are not familiar with, or it's in the past or something like that, just make sure that you've got your other things really strong, other relatable elements, right? Because this is the purple one. This fits into the relatability element. So make sure there are other things that you're able to connect with the character's common humanity, and yeah, you can still relate to them, even though their culture, their environment, whatever is foreign to you.
Yeah, and I had this problem again with Byzantium as a setting. So much of it was unfamiliar to people, and I knew it. And so it was really, I had to kind of introduce it in waves, like introduce where it's at, and then have her relatable, introduce a little bit more, have a relatable moment. So it was a real challenge to do that. But I think you just hit the nail on the head. If your character is relatable, will stick with you through an unfamiliar environment. As long as there's something, there has to be something grounded about it, but you can get through it.
And now, there's another thing you can do too, is in your unfamiliar setting, try to introduce something that's familiar. This is especially easier to do in like, if you have a lot of control, like it's fantasy, it's for kids or something like that. I wonder if there would be examples of this with Hiccup, because it's like, for example, if you're telling a story for kids and you're in a fantasy setting, but you put them, the characters are going to school. That introduces some more familiarity.
Right. Well, right. Yeah, that's where I was going with this, because I was thinking that this is actually, I think, the weakest one yet, a weak point here in this articulation, because it seems like he hasn't completely defined on what it means by familiar setting. Because
just a setting that you've been in, that that you're from. Yeah.
No, I know.
Well, in fact, I would say, I think I'm with Heath on this. It's actually more interesting to be in a new set. I think what he should say is place the character in a familiar scenario, maybe something like baseball. Remember that movie Twilight? and the vampires are all playing baseball. They're doing all this superpower stuff, but we can relate to the game of baseball, so we could still kind of follow it, I guess.
Yeah, interesting point.
My point was that he says place the character in a familiar setting, but then he gives a very expansive idea of what setting is. His next sentence is the time in which the character lives, the place where she works, and her home and family situation all contribute to greater empathy. So there's a lot here, which is what you went with, what Brianna just touched on, which is what I was saying, that can you have, like, what if you're in the future, but you are at school? Like, is that part of the setting, or is that a scenario like Doug is talking about? This is why I think this is a weaker phrase.
Like the Jetsons.
The Jetsons. Like with Luke Skywalker, okay, desert planet in the future, or a long time ago, but whatever, science fiction setting. But his family situation, And he mentions family here as setting. Like if I talk about setting, okay, desert planet on a galaxy in a sci-fi set, okay, not relatable. But if setting includes family situation, then that's not, then Luke Skywalker does have familiar setting to people. Likewise with Hiccup, that if you've got okay, fantasy Viking, maybe that's not a familiar setting, but his, again, family situation, angst between, because you feel like you're not living up to what your father wants and all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like this one needs greater specificity and its use of the word setting here.
I like your critique. I think that's a good one, because
Agreed.
when you put it that way, that makes sense. That basically that there's ways to introduce familiarity, I think, in any story you're writing.
Yeah.
Well, and to be honest,
didn't it say doctor or something like that?
Yeah, and
it's
he has it lower on the list, so it's not something that's going to do a lot on its own, but it can be an additional thing that helps.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I think almost the opposite is true. When I read a book, I love being in an unfamiliar setting, but as long as the people are doing something familiar, there's something interpersonal, some pattern that's familiar, then I can do it. When I'm reading Dune, I've never, it doesn't remind me of a familiar setting in my life, but that's part of the allure.
I think what the way that I see this would be like, if I'm watching a movie, and I'm trying to think of something specific here that I've actually experienced. Because I was going to say, like, if I'm seeing characters going to public school, I don't relate to that. I was a homeschooled kid, so that would be it. But that would be an example, I suppose. Let's imagine I wasn't a homeschooled kid. There's, and I see, and I'm watching a movie, and it's the same era when I was a kid, and they're going, in the same part of a country. You feel a little bit more connected. I was recently reading a book, my first ever Stephen King book. And some of the book was set where I live. It was set here in Colorado, and he was mentioning specific places that I know. I'm like, I know where that is. And it created an extra little bit of connection to the material, because there was that familiarity. There was that sense of like, oh, I've been there. What's that? Yeah, relatability. Yeah.
No, well, believability is what I said.
Yeah. I think it makes it when it's the more that is familiar, it's like less of a transition. I feel like you're able to sort of step into the world more easily, and it creates kind of a shortcut. But of course, the limitation is that you don't know who your you can know generally who your audience is, but you don't know exactly what their experiences are. So,
but can I just say, I'm shocked that Stephen King set something that wasn't in Maine.
Yeah, most of the book is set in New England, but from the start of the book, the character comes to Colorado. So yes, most of it is set in New England.
Wow, Stephen King left the boundaries of Maine in a book.
Wow.
Almost all his stories are set
he
like
must
the
have
same
lived
area.
in both these places at some point, because you can tell.
It reminds me of also, I think this was a discussion with Lou actually as well, so he's coming up again here, but he was talking about that. He was saying that what's the key to making genre fiction mass market? If you want to do fantasy or science fiction, what's the key to actually making them have mass market appeal? And he was saying that it's family and having family relationships, that everybody can identify with family relationships and dynamics and all of that. And so the quintessential success in this regard was Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire, because here we had an extremely successful, ignoring the end, but an extremely successful mass market, mass popularity fantasy story. But what was a major component of that fantasy? It was family dynamics. So everyone could relate to family dynamics.
That's interesting, because one of the flaws that I thought of with Rey Skywalker, and even Solo, because Solo was a flop, they didn't even give them last names. And I was like, who can relate to that? Like, what character comes from nothing? Like it was like Rey had some past, but there was no real defined like family dynamic. Solo, he had to make up his own last name even in that movie. I was like, who's writing these? Where they don't think of the character, like it's almost as if the character exists outside of human reality. So I think that's a great point that family dynamics is a universally at least recognizable on some level. Even if you hate your family, that's still part of the interaction. You know, the animosity or the resentment or the rivalry. You know.
Can we bring up James Bacon's comment about Ghostbusters, because it gave me a thought?
Yes, absolutely. James Bacon says, I agree with that, Brianna. When I saw the first 8 seconds of the new Ghostbusters trailer and Cruel Summer was playing and the voice on the radio dated it to the 80s, I got extremely excited.
So here's a thought. If you are trying to target a specific audience, like with the Ghostbusters, I imagine they're targeting people who, I don't know this franchise, but I'm imagining they were trying to get to like the nostalgia of it, people who watched the earlier ones when they were younger or something. Maybe, am I correct? I don't know anything about Ghostbusters, but if that was what they were trying to do, they know that, okay, my main audience is going to be about this age. They're going to relate to this kind of music. You know, like you can do that in a targeted way. So that would be like a practical way, another practical way anyway, to use this technique. Is like, you want to establish some familiarity, and you know you have a core target audience in mind, and you know what would be familiar to them. So that would be a way to just get that extra feeling of connection with them.
Yep.
All right, let's go to the next one.
All right.
Number 7. This is one where he puts low, and I actually consider it to be very powerful. It is for me anyway. So give character familiar flaws and foibles. I love this one so much. So this is closely related to like undeserved misfortune and humor. This can be, something like someone is always bumping into walls. That's both funny and it is, a familiar, like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. The example I gave earlier with the Peter Parker thinking that, he was waving and thinking she was waving back. That fits into this one too, where it's like, that's an undeserved misfortune and it is a familiar flaw, foible. When we see characters that mess up and they do so in really like ways that are really relatable to a lot of people. I think that's very powerful. It just makes a character so much more endearing. Like, oh, I can relate to that. That's so human. And that's a good way to bring them down to your level too. If they're, say, too far in competency, this is a great way to make them relatable. It's like, make them mess up, let them be awkward, let them just all the things that are painful that we experience as humans.
Right. I totally agree with that. To me, that is relatable, and it's humbling to a character. Yes. In fact, I was talking about Harrison Ford. One of the things I liked about him is Indiana Jones. He wasn't athletic. He didn't look the part. He seemed awkward when he ran. He looked heavy when he jumped, and so. But that's almost like a flaw. Here's this guy trying to perform all these highly athletic. He's crawling under a truck, for crying out loud, but he's genuinely not athletic, and I think that was part of. I think that ties in here where it's a drawback for a guy performing highly athletic feats to not be athletic.
And I think this is good. Another good one to go for, not just for if you need to bring them down because of too much, skills, too many skills, competency, etc. It can also be a good one for if the unfamiliar setting situation. So that's one of my go-tos. I'm like, if I'm writing in an unfamiliar setting, let's try to make these characters as relatable as possible. I was going to say something else related to that. Oh, also, flaws can be, little things. Oh, you kind of laugh. I relate to that. They can be serious flaws too. And that's kind of getting into other elements of character development, which is maybe off topic for today. Every character should have flaws. That related to their theme and stuff like that. So that's kind of another topic, but that can be part of this. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I wonder. The thing I wonder about here is when he says it's closely related to both undeserved misfortune and creating a character who's funny. Okay, I can see foibles. Now here he actually does say in this creating a character who is funny, not just has a sense of humor, but here he actually says creating a character who is funny. Okay, a character with foibles, especially if we relate to them. Okay, I got that. But it seems to me having a flaw doesn't relate to undeserved misfortune quite as well, because
no, I think that's related to foibles.
foibles. Yeah, I guess it would be because the flaws. I mean, maybe. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would associate it more with foibles than familiar flaws, because if you have a flaw and something and misfortune happens to you because of that, that's not undeserved. That might be a major flaw or a minor flaw, but that doesn't go quite so well.
Well, yeah, flaws also lend themselves to vulnerability. Like, if you have a personality flaw, your best friend knows it. So, they always have this kind of one up on you whenever this flaw is being exhibited, So there is vulnerability that comes with flaws. And I think that that's a good thing, especially in interpersonal relationships, because the person who doesn't have the flaw is usually hyper aware of you who has it. And they'll tell you about it usually in these scenarios. So, having it, and it could also introduce a level of unreliability in a character. You might be hyper competent, right? But he goes to the bottle too much. Now he might not be reliable. So in this, if he drank the night before or whatever. So flaws make your character complex like that, and give power over your character it gives power over your character to other characters.
I want to say that I think I said that Maverick was going to rescue Hollywood in the opening of Top Gun, but actually I think it was Cougar. Sorry about that.
Cougar.
I'm sure somebody else.
I was going to make the joke that he saves the cat. Cougar is a cat.
The Cougar is a cat. Yeah. The guy who went out and saved is Cougar. That's a great point. The Cougar is the guy who went out to save. He does save the cat. He saves a large cat. But he doesn't.
Well, in this topic here, Iceman. What's Maverick's flaw? He's overconfident, right? He's dangerous. And because he has this flaw, Iceman has a little power over him because Iceman recognizes this. So that's what makes Iceman and Maverick so interesting, because Maverick's this great pilot with this one flaw, but the guy who doesn't have that flaw is Iceman, and he calls it out every single time. And that gives Iceman kind of a leg up on Maverick. So that's a perfect example in Top Gun of how a flaw can empower other characters over your beloved lead character. And that's good. That's a good thing. And we love Iceman to this day because of it, because he had the courage to call it out on Maverick.
Well, I know Iceman frequently comes up on a list of like antagonists in certain ways who is actually right.
Yeah, he's almost like a mentor.
Is right throughout the most of the film. Yeah,
and he's and it makes in Top Gun Maverick, there's that great line. It was one of the best lines of a sequel that I've seen, at least in a long time, where he's like, who was the best pilot? And Maverick is like, this is a good moment. Let's not ruin it. That was awesome. But it shows that rivalry that we were just talking about, where Maverick had a flaw, Iceman did not. Iceman had this leg up. Iceman actually won Top Gun. He gives it to him, though. But it carries over into the sequel to great effect.
All right.
Would you have some more you wanted to say on your two movies for this one, Heath?
No, not so much here.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like if I were to fix Rey, I think the two big things is I would want her to have more of her competency needed to be earned. That's the most obvious one. And she needed more of this. She needed more
flaws and foibles.
Flaws and foibles make her more human.
Yeah, I believe it or not, I actually really like Daisy Ridley. And to be perfectly honest, she did look iconic and feel iconic in that Force
I loved her in the first movie. It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah. She demonstrated some competency. Climbing into the Star Destroyer in the beginning of that is spelunking, scavenging. There was a sense of competency there. She was living in a kind of poverty. That's a flaw. That's something that makes us empathize or sympathize with her. So they almost had it, man, but they really lost their way with her. They just they stripped down all the things that would have endeared her to us, with the thinking that the thinking seems to be we don't want to portray. I think the thinking was we don't want to portray a female heroine, in particular in this case, as having flaws. And I think that's the exact opposite of what they should have done, because who doesn't have flaws?
Yeah, the principles for developing good characters are gender neutral. So if it works for a male character, it works for a female character.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, 100%. And I remember by the time Last Jedi came out, I was like, if a young girl is watching Rey, and then one day in her life she's having a problem, how is Rey modeling anything for her? Rey doesn't have any self-doubt. Rey doesn't ever question herself. It's nice to see a character like Luke Skywalker, for example, get beat and then come back. That was useful to me in real life, that the hero can return. So anyway, sorry, you touched on something that I get pretty invested in.
Yeah.
James, for $10, thank you very much, James. For $10, James says flaws and foibles fall under the man versus self, and it becomes a milestone in either ultimately overcoming or succumbing to them. This is why a flaw is important. It establishes the man versus self conflict.
That's a good point, because quite often we are our own worst enemy. I mean, each one of us can think of how many times we've sabotaged ourselves, our success, even if it's self-doubt, paralyzing fear, all these things. So the man versus self or woman versus self, those are huge. And that's part of what makes you want to watch to see how your character overcomes those, or the character that you're watching overcomes it.
Yeah, I just saw another note that I had to mention here for this one it's that this is what connects us to the common humanity of a character. It's one of the ones that makes them feel most human, which is another reason why I feel like this shouldn't be so low on the list. I think it's essential, to be honest.
Well, and Adrian from Stomping Kittens, who we've talked to, would talk about how a major part of the story arc is overcoming this character flaw, overcoming this flaw. And that's when you're actually cinching what Drake might call the invisible layer. When you've cinched the invisible layer of the story, now you can go on to resolve.
Ooh, I like that. The invisible layer.
Yeah. The invisible layer is all of the invisible layer in Star Wars A New Hope is faith versus technology. That the invisible layer of the story is the conflict between faith and technology. And then the
physical why I like that term? Because that's the thing that you might not consciously be putting into the story that emerges.
Right. And you can't ever directly say.
Beautiful.
Whereas the physical layer in Star Wars is, the Empire versus the Rebellion.
Right.
All
right. One more, although I'm going to add one.
Okay.
That is in the spreadsheet. All right. So he adds number 8. This is another one of those it's kind of like the familiar setting one. It's a small thing, but it adds to the picture. And that is making the character the eyes of the audience. So we feel closer to a character if we're seeing things from their point of view. Basically, if the narrative is distant, we kind of feel distant. And it's a small amount. I don't think this on its own does a lot, but does something. And so just the mere fact that, for example, in a novel that we are reading from the point of view of a certain character, that just inherently makes us a little bit more interested in that character. Now, that's not enough to hold you through the whole novel, but it does make you that's the priority. That's the character that is most important, right?
Well, I would just add, or I would almost want to revise this.
Oh, okay.
Or at least a variant, because it could go either way. Usually a side character is best for the eyes of the audience. You have the larger than life character on some level that we still relate to. We still see flaws. And then you have the other character standing there who's a little bit more down to earth, the relatable, or the eyes of the audience. So I don't know. I think a side character sometimes fits this almost better. Alien. We were talking about Alien. Lambert. They cast the actress and Lambert, and her specific directive direction was that you are the audience. You're the character that sits in for everyone in the theater. So when you're screaming, that's because that's what we want the audience to feel. So, and she wasn't the main character.
James says audience insert is extremely important in sci-fi and fantasy. The audience is seeing the setting standards for the first time, usually, and we need someone to experience that along with.
Great point.
Yes. Well, that's what on occasion screenplay will include a character who is not the hero. This is from the book, but who serves as the eyes of the audience. So that is covered here. The advantage of this device is to create immediate identification with the more familiar character and then transfer that identification to the hero through the course of the film.
I'm glad you brought that up.
That's what Hauge says on page 55. But I think he's saying here identification is sometimes strengthened when the audience only learns information as the hero learns it.
Yeah, that's another good one to mention as well.
Yeah.
Because if you know things that the character doesn't, you're putting things together faster than them. That creates a sense of separation. Because now you're getting frustrated. You're like, oh, why can't you see? But when if you're only learning things as they're learning it, you're just right with them. you're right with them trying to find out what's going to happen next. So yeah, not every story calls for that, but it is something that you can use intentionally for that effect. There was something else I was going to say on this. Oh, I was just going to say this makes me think a lot of The Great Gatsby, where you have a different character that is. You have the character is the titular character, and then there's the one that is the eyes of the audience.
Larger than life character, Gatsby. God, what was his name? Who is the audience character?
I can't remember.
Oh my god, I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, yeah, that's a great example, Brianna. The lead character in that. So, I've even experimented with this, studying stories where you take a larger than life character and then you tell the story from the point of view of the average character. 20,000, or I'm sorry, Moby Dick does this. You got Queequeg and Captain Ahab and these larger than life characters. And then you got this really regular guy, Ishmael, who goes on this voyage. I actually think the movie Amadeus is like that, where you've got this larger than life historical figure, genius, musical genius. And then you've got Salieri, who stands in for us a little bit more average, right? At the end of the movie, he's like, I am the champion of mediocrities. And he literally walks by and forgives all the mediocrities who cannot live up to the. So I think that's a very important dynamic to explore if you're a writer. If you're going to tell a story, if you have a larger than life character, that character might be a hard person to tell the story from that point of view, because they're a little too large for us to relate to sometimes.
Is Nick Carraway?
Nick Carraway, that's it.
The Great Gatsby.
Thank you, James. I knew James would do that. James or
anything else on this one?
I think that's important. I actually think this is very important, and I actually think that it's very important strategically for writers to consider who is going to be the audience character. You need to have that.
Well, I think it's important. I think that not letting the audience get ahead of the character is key, as Michael Hauge is explaining it in this paragraph, as I see, because there's a different the audience insert to learn about the setting seems to be a little bit different than what he's saying here, because he says, in a mystery, for example, the reader might only be given the clues as the detective gets them. And that would be, don't let the audience get out ahead of the character and make the audience, the main character seem stupid. Body Heat is an excellent example of the hero serving as the eyes of the audience, for we become aware of what's really going on only as Ned Racine does. So that does make it seem like it's a little bit different than the audience insert to experience the world. I think.
Yeah.
I think.
Now, you might be right that maybe we're talking about two different archetypes here.
It's possible. It's possible from what we're saying.
So I have something I want to add. I didn't put it in.
Oh, we're about to get Da Silva'd.
Not necessarily. I just feel like this should go on the list too. And I thought about it today, so it's not in there. But so that would be
Take this down.
This is another technique, right? Related to other aspects of character development. And that would simply be giving the character A goal or a yearning. We used that word before when we were reading the
Robert Owen.
what was that book called? From Where
You Dream.
Because especially if this is combined with other things, right? If there's a horrible character that wants something, we don't want them to succeed at that. But I think if there's a character we already feel something towards and we see them express some sort of longing or yearning or goal, we want them to succeed in that. And this is also a very great way to be evil. So I'm going to give my techniques for being evil. If you have a character you're about to kill, it's great to make sure they have some sort of unfinished goal that you are slightly invested in. So that's for free.
Explain that one.
What'd you say?
Do you mind explaining that a little bit?
Yeah, because it makes like it specifically in terms of what the example of a character death or just in general.
Well, you said to have an unfinished goal for a character death.
Yeah, because it makes that it just makes it more tragic. So this would be more like for a side character. You know, this is not. I'm not talking about a goal that is related to the main plot, but it's like if this character
that makes me think of Unforgiven. He's like, I was building a house. His goal was to build that house, and he's like, I don't deserve this. And then of course the lead, William Money's like, deserving's got nothing to do with it. And
it is a cliche though. Lots of people do this. So make sure you're not heavy-handed about it, because if you introduce that at the wrong time, people are like, this character's about to die. If you're like, oh, I have my wife at home and she's about to have a baby and I'm just looking so forward to being a dad. And this is like a person on a battlefield. You're like, he's about to die. So
look out. He's wearing a red shirt on Starfleet.
So be careful with it. But, just in general, I think we care about a character, and with any of these other traits, we see that they're longing for something. I think we are invested in seeing them get that. So that translates into us rooting for them, especially if what they're longing for is like actually related to the plot of the story, which it should be. But
that's a good point.
That is a Cthulhu shirt. Oh, so this is a quote from the show that Heath and I made called
show that to everybody.
The Cultists. This is a quote from the season 1. You can't
Cthulhu with sour cream and onion.
Summon Cthulhu with sour cream and onion.
Doug hasn't gotten to that part of the Cultist yet.
That's true.
Not yet.
So yeah, that's one of the Cultist shirts, and I want to bring those back because we were relaunching the Cultist. We're now up to the first 5 episodes of the Cultists is now on the Cultist YouTube channel. And then there's also commentary. So we are re-releasing those, and we're gonna bring. I want to re-release those shirts that people.
Okay, so there isn't a way for people to get it currently.
There's no way for people to get it currently, but when we do the next Kickstarter or crowdfunding campaign, I want to put those shirts back on because Brianna designed those shirts.
Oh yeah. I made that.
Nice.
That's Brianna's design right there, and they need to get out to more people out there in the world. So
yeah, there are like 3, I think, a total of 3 shirts that I designed. Is that right? There's 3 because then there's the Mama Shub one related to this episode that just came out.
There's thank you Mama Shub.
Then there's
the goats.
All hail the goat, whatever.
All hail the black goat.
I did an illustration of a creepy goat.
But then there's also the Cultist coffee and the Witch's brew.
Yeah,
which you didn't design those logos, but those go along with it. So there are Cultist shirts that we're going to put on the next crowdfunding campaign.
How come we never have a show about it? Like a focused show on just the Cultists?
I guess we should, huh?
Well, we should. I did a watch party, and it was just me on Table Talk one night. That actually it was Halloween because Halloween was a Tuesday, and everybody because it was Halloween, and so I just did a watch party of the Cultists. But yeah, we should we can do a watch party of the Cultists for one of our shows.
And Heath and I have also made a lot of content like behind the scenes type stuff that's going out on the channel too, on the Cultist channel. So if people want to listen to that, that is there. Watch that. Yeah, go ahead. Well, we're
very
talking
cool. That is a cool shirt. That's wearable.
Thank you. I'm wearing it. Yes.
So this. Oh,
that was interesting. And
there's more. Our presentation isn't done. I want to make sure we're not.
The presentation is not done. Oh, there we go. So there we go. But I would say here's the Cultists YouTube channel. So Brianna is the co-writer and director. I'm the co-writer and producer and creator. So check this out. And so if you want to, please come over and subscribe. The first 5 episodes are there on the channel. and also the producer, Eaten Alive by Evil Doms. There we go.
That's the one that the Thank You Mama Shub is quoting. So
yeah, that one's from Thank You Mama Shub. Episode
this is
5.
quoting the climax of the final episode. So
producer's commentary, director's commentary, and then also here's season 1, the first 5 episodes. So I think episode 6 releases tomorrow. All right, well let me bring up your commentary again.
Yes. So we've finished going through Michael Hage's stuff. Hague, however you want to say his name. I don't know. So another thing he mentioned is that, and we noticed, we identified some examples that were exceptions to this where it was done differently. But for the most impact, he recommends that you establish these traits right away and then reveal the character's flaws. So there may be cases where you might not be, you're not trying to get the the absolute peak of likability of empathy and maybe you may not need to do that, but if you are trying to get someone to really, really connect with this character, then hold off on showing their sort of unlikable traits until after you've established your identification with them. I think that's generally a good trait. He gave an example of Tootsie, which I still haven't watched or read. So many books reference that. Because, this character is just a terrible person. He's a womanizer. He's sexist. He's really selfish. All these things. But you first show him going through like a bunch of things, like undeserved misfortune, and I can't remember what the other ones are. You see a sequence of him experiencing these things that make you that endears him to you, and then you find out, oh, he's also kind of a terrible person. But you're able to forgive that. And kind of go along with the story because you're already connected with them. All right. But what if you don't want audiences to root for a character? What if you want them to root against a character? What if you want them to hate a character? Whoops, sorry, I went too fast. So yeah, we could just reverse engineer this, and we'll do that a little bit at the end for fun. But there's another resource. There's this video from a YouTuber named Brandon McNulty, and he made this video called "How to Make Hateable Villains." I watched it several months ago, and I took notes, and I thought they were really great. There's some really great ideas that I wanted to include in this conversation. So if you search that, how to make hateable villains, his video will come up. Yeah, so he's talking about, so this is in the case of sometimes you want a complex villain, but sometimes you don't. Depending on your story, sometimes you don't want gray morality or, complex anti-heroes with sympathetic pasts or like a cool or like a charming bad guy. Sometimes you really need like a black and white, like I need a villain that people hate.
That's the bad guy.
Yes, like that you're just completely rooting against. Like there are cases where that's what the story needs. So how do you do that? So he has a few ideas. 4. And I think they're pretty great. So he used the term
kill the dog. I saw that.
Kick the dog instead of save the cat, kick the dog. So this would be like, I thought a way to connect this to the other thing is like this character is going to be the cause of someone else's undeserved misfortune. I think all those words are important there. Undeserved misfortune. That is just, there's just no need to do it, but they do it anyway because they're being selfish, they're being cruel, whatever. We immediately despise that, right? And I love the way how that mirrors with save the cat, kick the dog,
yep.
Or you can make it even worse, kick the puppy. That really gets the sense of just how wicked and despicable this person is. Like I feel like I'm already hating this imaginary person that we don't know who this person is.
Well, look at John Wick. They made an entire franchise off killing a puppy.
Right.
Yeah, and we've talked about this phrase quite extensively in the past on this show and on other episodes of this show, because I think that James was even talking about this, that like if it's not, and I like what you have written here, because it's not in this sense the mirror of saving the cat. Like you're not going to have this guy go and do something terrible to someone. That's not it. I like what you use, the cause of someone else's misfortune, and it's frequently therefore the protagonists.
Yeah.
And it's the protagonist that first saves the cat, does something nice, and then the protagonist is the dog that gets kicked. This is him. This is his undeserved misfortune. And if you put that at the hands of the person who's supposed to be the villain, it's the protagonist getting kicked.
Yeah, so especially if you're a protagonist or just anyone that you've already established some sense of connection with, some sense of identification with. So it could be a side character, but like an important side character too. But I think that could have a similar effect as well. But yeah, not just some random person, probably not. But I don't know. And then this is one that was an interesting note, which is just to don't make the villain likable. So the two things he was saying to look out for are like charisma or humor. Of course, we talked about quite a lot of likable traits, but I think these two are interesting because they're ones that we're most likely to give villains, because we like to make fun villains. It's fun having a villain that's like really charming, really funny. But if you want people to hate the villain, don't give them those kinds of traits. So just something to keep in mind, because then they're going to be like, it creates a different emotional effect. Like they're just like, oh, that's the bad guy. But I love watching their scenes. Like I love, like you just like, you enjoy this bad guy. Maybe on some dark level, you almost want to be the bad guy, right? Like there are some examples of like bad guys being just kind of cool. So don't make your bad guy cool if you want people to hate him.
If you want them to be hated.
If you want them to be hated. This is a specific, you have a specific goal in mind, right? And then he mentions unforgivable behavior. So obviously any villain is going to do wrong things that are wrong. But if you really want to hate this character, have them cross lines that are just too far, where like you just can't forgive that. Like there's no way that you're going to be like, oh, they could redeem from that. Like make them go too far, basically. And then the fourth one, I love this note, is to give them power they didn't earn. So this kind of connects with some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. So this is like having the character get lucky, or they cheat in the way that they get their power. So that way, that rather than wanting to be them, we kind of resent them. He was saying that we respect the hustle. And so if a character didn't have to hustle to get their power, we may resent that. Now, I would add to that, I think that there are cases where we have a hero that we like that gets power they didn't earn, right? Like sometimes superpowers, for example, are imbued kind of randomly. So I think all these things they matter in balance with each other. But that is that kind of goes into like what we were talking about with being too competent, and it's not, they haven't earned it, basically. Do that on purpose if you want people to hate someone. Any reflections on those guys?
Well, I mean, if you're creating a black and white villain, then yeah, I think these are good rules.
That's what it's for.
Right. I mean, they're good rules, but what are we writing, like a Disney cartoon? How? For me, it always seems like the more complex you can make a villain, the better the villain is. It doesn't always make them likable. It makes them complex, and nuanced. So part of my question was, in what context do you want just a black and white villain? Like I think of Disney shows, the villains are pretty straightforward. But even in Star Wars, where you had like Darth Vader, he ended up getting complex and more interesting. Maybe
Darth Vader doesn't fit into this. He's definitely more of a cool villain.
The Emperor, maybe.
Yeah, I think it just depends on what your goals are. Like, unlike you, I prefer complex characters. I'm not someone that's really interested in the black and white, but I can enjoy that sometimes. As an audience member, like I'll give an example of a movie that comes to mind for me would be Pan's Labyrinth. There was nothing redeemable about the villain in that character, and it goes. Let me go to the next slide, because this is what the satisfaction is if you create this sort of black and white character. Is that eventually they need to have their comeuppance. They need to finally get what they deserve. So there's a certain kind of story where that satisfaction is just very delicious. And if you feel any sort of, if you're torn at all and you kind of feel something for that character, you don't get that same, like, sometimes I think this is less popular today. I think maybe more in like the 50s or something, you would have movies that were more like these black and white, good versus evil. But every so often, I think there is still a place for that, where it can be just like, all right, and good guys win, bad guys lose, and you're right. Most of this is probably going to be more like stuff for kids, but not always.
Well, not always. In fact, James just said Sauron. I don't think of Lord of the Rings as like a Disney style cartoon show.
Yeah.
Palpatine is a little bit more straightforward evil. Sauron's a good example for sure. But yeah, there is, just so you know, there in the literary world, there is some criticism against this kind of villain now, because it lends itself towards stigmatizing individuals. I'm not even saying I agree with all this, but I'm just saying there is, even I've gotten pushback on it when I talk about it at times. So, because what you're trying to do is dehumanize the character to make them as dislikable as possible. And there is some, like you said, it becomes easy to give them their comeuppance. So you make them really hateable. But anyway, let's keep exploring it. I'm curious to see where the rest of this goes.
I want to add to that. I almost feel like, as you're talking about that, I almost feel like I wouldn't. I'm trying to think if I want to commit to this statement. I'm going to say this in a non-committal way, but
sure.
I almost feel that I would never do this in a book, just because novels inherently have more room for complexity, and then that I think I, as a reader, expect it. But I think some movies work that way, where it's very.
No, you're right. I think Sauron. James's mention of Sauron was a good. Now, keep in mind, Palpatine was almost introduced. It wasn't really introduced until the second film. To kind of as Vader got more complex, it was almost like Lucas wanted that pure evil character sitting there. But yeah, maybe films, because you're right. Pan's Labyrinth. The fascist.
That's one of my favorite villains ever, is in Pan's Labyrinth, and he's completely hateable. But his arc is so good. Is everything he creates his own fall. Like it's all because of his terrible actions that he gets his comeuppance.
Yeah. So you're right. There is room for these characters for sure. But Pan's Labyrinth, it does kind of fall a little bit into that fable-like, overarching structure. However, but it was a great movie. I loved it. So I can't say that this kind of thing doesn't work. And I love Lord of the Rings. I love Star Wars. I love Pan's Labyrinth. I love Aladdin with Jafar. There's nothing likable about him. So there's definitely space for this. So I guess I don't want to disrupt this too much. I just, modern literary criticism really attacks this kind of thinking. But my writer side says, hey, if it works, man, for the sake of the story.
I'm reluctant to use this most of the time for myself, but sometimes I think there's a place for it.
No, there's space for it. I think that's a fair way to frame that.
I was trying to look up some stuff in Drake here.
Okay.
Dynamics.
I finally watched your interview with him, by the way. That was great.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, Drake is fantastic. And he's got information on this, because it's a particular type of story that James actually touches on here. Sauron and Palpatine are entirely irredeemable, and Hollywood prefers forgiveness, redemption, humanization at the moment. Right? It's whether you're. I'm trying to paraphrase here. This may not be exactly right, but Drake would say it depends on whether or not your theme is going to be answered in your protagonist. Are you talking about Luke Skywalker? He was going to have to make a choice between faith and technology. So that's you need characters who are pro faith. This is faith. They were always showing you faith, and the other ones who were always showing you technology, and to have them choose between them. It's not important for the technology people to, repent or something like that, because Luke is going to give you the answer to your theme when he makes the choice. And this is it's two different styles of storytelling, where you've got this oscillating, like if you've got this hateable villain, right, who is demonstrating something in the world, and your protagonist is trying to make a choice about these things, or is the world trying to make a choice about these things? See the discussion with Drake, because I believe we talked about that during that conversation. I need to have him back. But right, it
seems like he wanted to come back.
A certain type of story structure that is.
See, James, I think See, I'm actually, by the way, for those who read my book, I have an entire chapter called The Reformed Villain, and I actually suggest that readers avoid it if you're using the labyrinth model. And my point was in the framework of the heroine's labyrinth, you're not the heroine isn't, you know, if the heroine's job, you know, we hate the damsel in distress, right? The helpless, reductive princess.
Only if she's actually helpless. I don't hate the damsel in distress.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, okay, fair enough. Well, the thinking is that you're freezing her. I guess the real criticism comes from freezing her in that position where she's always waiting for an external force to help her.
She has no competence.
Or agency, right? Yeah, she's no competence, no agency.
You're feeling some pity. You're looking down on her.
Right. She's always doomed to wait for an external force to help her, always. I feel like the reformed villain in the heroine's labyrinth context pits the protagonist, freezes them in the redeeming another person position. And in the heroine's labyrinth, that's what the beast as ally does. So in the labyrinth, you have the beast as ally, the redeemable character, and then you got the Minotaur, the unredeemable character. So, you know, I'm actually against now I'm not saying I'm against it exclusively. There are fantastic stories where the redeemed villain is important. Moana has a redeemed villain.
I was about to say, I was thinking of Moana.
Yeah, and that I would never touch that. That is beautiful. If your story is genuinely lending itself to a reformed villain, then by all means. But I think I'm against what James is talking about, which is it should never be a go-to standard model. I still think that the reformed villain should still be a little bit of an exception because you will run up against people like this that are not, it's not your job to fix them or to heal them or to redeem them. You have to identify that. And these stories provide that model. So when you're talking about the hateable villain, what you're really talking about is someone who is irredeemable, you know, someone who isn't. My point, I guess, also is that you can have an irredeemable character who's still complex. You know, I think Thanos, you know, when Thanos is like, hey, overcrowding is a problem, we need to get rid. There are people, and I have had these conversations, like, you know, technically Thanos had a point. I love that. They're not saying that they would join him. You know, they still see him as irredeemable, but they're like, well, but, you know, he had an interesting philosophy.
He's a great, well-written villain. And I think it's because he's a villain that has a point of view, you know, and he's right. And I think that's really important.
Right. That's what I like, is that there's some nuance and complexity to the villain, even if they're irredeemable.
Right. That they're justifying it to themselves.
Oh, James, I know. I know that you don't. We're on the same page. What I was saying is you were talking about that it's kind of a trend right now in Hollywood to have redeemable villains. And I think you're right, is what I was trying to say. What I'm saying is, although that is an option, I think we should be careful with it. It shouldn't be a standard option, in my view.
All right, what do I have next here? Oh, so I wanted to end. So this is basically all of the tools we've done. We've explored all these tools, and I wanted to play with them a little bit. So, you know, because we're talking about, these are basically like dials that you can kind of tweak. Not the last four. The last four are just like, here's how to make someone that you hate. We're talking specifically about Michael Hauge's techniques.
Right.
So we talked about how to use them to make us like someone, but what if we want to turn the knob in another direction? Let's say we want to feel indifferent to someone. Maybe we're not going to completely hate them. It's not like a pure evil kind of a character, but we're not going to root for them. So let's see what that might look like, just for fun. So here I'm saying, let's create some unlikable or annoying characters. Let's try to aim for something a little more lukewarm / in the dislike territory. So I want to know what you guys think, because I was just kind of playing with it. So maybe there's more here that I'm missing. All right. So number one was to create sympathy. We said that was to give character undeserved misfortune, but don't make them pathetic. So we're saying maybe pity is not the right word here. But basically, this is where you want to intentionally make us look down on the character. Or it could be that they have misfortune, but it's deserved, right? Like they're experiencing misfortune that they had coming to them. That could be one. They're like whiny, they're complaining about their circumstances, but they're not fixing it, kind of a thing. So like not balancing it with you know, some element of competence, I think. Like, I'm, you know, this is an annoying character, right?
Yeah, well, I don't think you say create pity, give a character deserved misfortune. I
These
don't
are
think
two different. These are two different notes, right? So give them deserved misfortune, or make them like pitiable, pathetic, that kind of a thing. That's probably not very well written.
Because you don't pity people who receive deserved misfortune.
No, I'm just yes. So that yes.
You can envy those people. That's a common trait.
No. If somebody receives deserved misfortune.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, deserved misfortune.
Right. So that would be
somebody who has a flaw, does something wrong, and receives punishment for that.
Yes.
Right. That's not pitiable.
No, that would be. So I'm just taking these traits and just going to their opposite. So that's kind of two different things. So you could have someone has misfortune, but it's what they should receive. Or you could have something where it's like they receive some sort of undeserved misfortune. But yeah, like they're in the ways we talked about before, we're kind of looking down on them instead of feeling for them. And then put in jeopardy. So I was wondering if, and this would be specifically if our hero is in jeopardy, but then maybe we have another character, like so saying the hero is struggling and suffered while this other character is enjoying, security and unease. I guess a better way to make the opposite of undeserved misfortune would actually be undeserved fortune. That's probably a better.
Yeah, that's a great one right there.
Yeah,
better.
I like that a lot.
I like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Then your character, because we were saying that's part of what makes the villain unlikable.
Yes.
Give that person undeserved fortune.
I'm going to change that in here. I'm going to edit that because I think that's what it should have said. Nope. All right, so here's some more. So we said, making them likable can be saving the cat, showing kindness, they're well liked by others, they have a sense of humor, other things like they're courageous, self-sacrificial, etc. All right, let's make them unlikable. So they could, we said kicking the dog might be more cruel, but you could just have them ignore the dog, right? Like someone needs help, they're being selfish, so like, I don't care. So that
makes the cat or kick the dog.
Yeah. So you could show them being disliked by others or liked by others we dislike. So that liking is not it doesn't have transference, right? Another one could be that they're too serious, they don't have a sense of humor, or they're cowardly rather than courageous. So all those things I think.
I think about Saving Private Ryan. There's that character who's completely cowardly to the point where he lets the other guy get killed. Oof. Heath, remember that?
Yeah.
Like you hate that guy. That guy is in my head to this day. I was like, he stood there and hid while his buddy was murdered in the room, and then let the guy who killed his buddy walk right by him. Like you'll never lose that. You'll never forget that moment. And then of course that guy who he let live goes on to continue fighting the war. We see him again later. So that's an example of cowardliness that makes you hate the character for all time.
All right, highly skilled. I put incompetent. It could be in some cases, but it may also be like what we were saying, like they are skilled, but it's like or maybe that's more in terms of power. So maybe I'll take that back. I think with the highly skilled, the opposite would be incompetence. And then with power, it's like they have power, but they shouldn't.
Well, let me just say the incompetence played it. It doesn't make you hate the character. It made you understand why someone else hated the character momentarily, and then it blew up. Powder. In Arcane, remember she was incompetent. Her bombs killed her friends. She was always. That's why she's like, you're a jinx. It got to the point where even you, the viewer, understood where Vi was when she turned on her.
Yeah.
And then you saw how this was such a mess. This created such a problem. But that was technically incompetent. Now, it didn't make you hate her, but what it did was it set the viewer up to agree with Vi when she turned on her. And I think that was rather very
but it's done. Also almost a hero because she is competent in making stuff.
That's an interesting point. It just never worked.
Right. She wasn't competent enough. She yeah. And I think with her, because she has all these other things. She has undeserved misfortune and stuff like that too. So that balances.
When it finally worked for her, she displayed competence and got undeserved misfortune.
But that was, I think, a very confident use of incompetence on the part of the writer to have you identify with Vi on something that the more you watch the show, you're like, she should have stuck with her. You know, the audience regrets siding with Vi because you see the long-term impact of turning against Powder, you know, what that led to. But that was a good use of incompetence. I'm not saying that works for what necessarily we're trying to do with this exercise, but it's a good use of incompetence in writing terms.
And I think I want to point out incompetence and cowardliness, both of these, and these are kind of complicated techniques. So we just gave an example of one that you have to really be careful, and it will probably take iterations and getting people's feedback on your characters before you get it right. But like, you can have characters that have some of these negative traits as their flaws if they overcome them, right? Like, you can have a character that starts off incompetent about something as long as we like them for other reasons, or they're cowardly as long as we like them for other reasons and we relate to them. If they then overcome it, then that can be a very satisfying thing. So just because someone has these things doesn't necessarily mean we automatically dislike them.
Correct. I think what you're doing is stacking it's all the right side for the unlikable villain.
Exactly. And this could be like a side character. Like what I'm describing here may not be even a villain. It's just some character that we just really don't like for whatever reason, depending on what your goals are. Power, but someone who doesn't have it. That's a really common one. I feel like, especially in like children's stories, you know, there's just that just this person that just
Joffrey Baratheon.
Yeah, we just hate this person, and they're abusing their power, or they didn't earn it.
Robert just said Commodus from the first Gladiator. That's another good use of a character that uses power in a way that none of us ever agree with them. Yep.
So I didn't do the last three. The last three didn't really. It was difficult to like do the opposite. But I think these ones are great too. They're great for tweaking those dials.
I gotta say, just offhand, people don't seem to have as much problem writing villains as they do likable heroes. I do think I think instinctively it's easier for us to write a villain, a two-dimensional villain, and I'm not saying that in a pejorative way. Two-dimensional villains have a great space in the storytelling world, but for whatever reason, like when I read stories, sometimes the villains are rarely the problem. It's usually the lead character is the opposite. The making them likable or respectable. That seems to be a little bit more challenging.
Or just making us care enough. Like sometimes they're just kind of bland. Just like no, they're a character, but like these things help us to care.
Yeah,
totally. It's agree. A character. Sorry. All right, on that note, let's move on. So some summary reflections. We're already kind of, I guess, at reflecting point, but I just wanted to have it all on one single page. If someone wanted to take a screenshot or something, I don't know. Obviously, definitely read his book, but here you can see them kind of in the two categories that I think they should go into, with the real relatability and respect. It's almost split between. It's not exactly half and half, but most of these are more in the relatable area. Let it sit for another second. All right, and then these are Brandon McNulty's for creating a hateable character, kick the dog, don't make them likable, unforgivable behavior, and power they didn't earn. So basically, all four of these kind of have a comparable purple, relatability thing. So I was saying, basically, green. They're all like kind of related to the green respect things. So you're basically replacing respect with resentment. And then I realized, oh my God, it's so cheesy. They all start with R. So there are the 3 R's of character empathy. Relatability, respect, and resentment. These are the 3 things that we're going to be thinking about, depending on what it is we want people to feel about our characters.
Well, that is awesome, Brianna.
Thank you. I have a couple more slides, but
I like that. Brianna, I'm glad this is getting out. The 3 R's of character empathy, brought to you by Brianna da Silva.
The 3 R's by Brianna da Silva. Yes. Okay, so I wanted to. We already did a whole bunch of examples of characters, but I wanted to just bring up a couple. I think we actually literally brought.
Like just name both like the
Jinx and Joffrey and Darth Vader.
Yeah, but Jinx is fantastic. We're talking not just Powder. We were mainly talking about Powder. But if you think about Jinx when she's Jinx, like she actually does some like genuinely evil things. Like she randomly just murders people like left and right. But we never perceive of it in that way because we've spent so much time developing our empathy with this character. Like there's a lot of pain in her past. And there's another great video out there. God, I wish I could remember what it was called, but there was a video that someone was breaking down Jinx's arc where she's basically following a hero's journey. So like we emotionally want her to succeed, even though she's like,
like we're conditioned to root for her.
Yeah, she's on a hero's journey towards evil. Like she's becoming a villain. She's becoming a much worse person. That's another. We could have a whole tough conversation about that some other day. But just talking about these techniques today, she has so many of those. So wait, we should go back and look at them and then think about Jinx. So. Sympathy. Okay, obviously. I mean, we don't even need to explain sympathy. She's in jeopardy, sure, a lot. She's likable, respectable. Trying to remember what. Yeah, I guess like what we're thinking about. What are some of the ones that would be likability?
Well, the mentoring scenes. There's the scene with her and Vi on the rooftop. She's like, "All this could be ours."
Yeah.
You know, there's a sense that she's bringing up her younger sister. And in writing terms, when a dominant character like Vi loves and buys into and entrusts Powder, you instinctively feel that same way. So
that's one of
there's a sense that she's being groomed for this really harsh world of Zahn.
Yep. So she is. Yep. So we're having that transference going on. Thank you. Maker, we talked about how even though she's almost a hero, like Heath said, like she has the skill, it's just isn't being helpful in the way that she wants it to be in this exact moment. But yes, she has that skill. Give her own power. I guess that's probably more Jinx later because everything I've said so far has been a lot of Powder. So she definitely has power when she's Jinx. She has the power to do kind of just to do what she wants to do in a way.
Well, she doesn't have any power as Powder.
No, that's more
ironically because that's very close in word, Powder and power. But I actually view her as a fragile power that the heroine betrays the archetype. She turns against the fragile power, and this ends up being extremely costly. But she uses chaos and randomness as power itself when she becomes Jinx. I mean, she has power over Silco. I always got the sense she could kill Silco anytime she wanted to. She just doesn't. She has a love for him or some sort of fondness for him that she doesn't do it, at least in the first 9 episodes. But she definitely has power as Jinx.
And she's also more. We were talking about highly skilled. That applies to her very much when she's Jinx too. Like the things that she was struggling with when she was Powder, she's not struggling with anymore. She can make these very effective explosives, and
but she also embraces her Jinx. You know, her Jinx was mistakes, and so she embraces chaos. And all those scenes of her with the minigun, just kind of randomly spraying it around. It even makes the murder of Silco ambiguous. Did she do it on purpose? We don't know because she's kind of being chaotic like she was before. So. I think she's incredibly I think she's an incredibly brilliant written anti-hero.
Yep. We've got some familiar family stuff we're talking about for as a better way to
sister relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then I would say, she's clumsy. So I think that fits into number 7, especially when she's younger. When she's older,
well, I would say mental illness. She suffers from like a schizophrenia. And I think like we see those like scratched out faces, like the angry face, like graffiti faces that pop up. That makes us feel like she's undergoing some sort of a psychotic episode. And I think that actually endears us to her because we feel like it comes from a trauma. And so we're sympathetic for that trauma.
Yep. So 8 doesn't really apply. But again, you don't need to have all 8 of these. you only really need one depending on what your character is. But because she does so many terrible things later, they definitely used a lot of these techniques, and that is why we are like rooting for her in spite of
I almost want to say we should for number 8, we should take out the word them and say a character. Make a character the eyes of the audience. I think that's a good rule. It doesn't have to apply to the main character. It could, but it certainly doesn't.
This is about how to make the character likable.
Right. I think to Heath's point earlier, I think the most important part is the fact that you're learning information with the character, I think is probably a good thing to emphasize for that one.
Yeah. James actually brings up a good point. At the beginning of the show, her childlike introduction to the world of Dawn and Piltover, it's called the eyes of it, seeing the world through the eyes of an innocent, which is very American, I found out, in terms of literature. She fits that bill. We're seeing we're introduced to these worlds through the eyes of an innocent, which is Powder.
We come into the story from her perspective. So by that valuation, it looks like all 8 are being used with this character.
That's a great point.
Interesting.
Yeah, we don't need to go through all of them for these.
She was the perfect one to go through anyway.
She was the perfect one, but I just thought it'd be fun to mention some of these other ones very briefly. Joffrey fits very well into the love to hate. Well, actually, why don't we go ahead, because this is a different set. Joffrey from Game of Thrones.
Oh my God, I hated Joffrey.
So many. He's so cruel to so many people for no reason, just for his own enjoyment. He's not, another thing that can go into this likability, this is very shallow, but it's often used in Hollywood, is just attractiveness too. Like sometimes it's like, oh, this is a terrible person, but they're attractive, and it shouldn't, it's just a messed up part of human psychology, but it can balance them out. And so like he doesn't have charisma. He doesn't have this cool suaveness to him. Just like even in the casting, he doesn't have like a main character look, you might say. So he's not likable. He definitely does unforgivable things. Like he definitely goes way too far all the time. And yeah, he didn't earn his power for sure. He's this pampered baby. He's also has some of these other ones we mentioned. Like I feel like he's kind of pathetic sometimes. Like when bad things do happen to him, he's like, "Mommy," like he's just this like spoiled, evil brat.
Yeah.
Basically. And so,
I wanted to mention.
Like, yes. Go ahead.
I wanted to mention something that DBJ is talking about. We did kind of address it in the sense that sometimes those unlikable traits are expressions of authenticity when done right. Meaning that's how the character really feels, and when it's expressed in that way, we do end up finding that endearing because it's honest, even if it's off-putting.
Yeah. So this stuff is complex, right? Like we're thinking about which type of likable traits combined with which other traits is really how this stuff works. It all works together.
Yeah, it's like a combination.
Right. Yeah, you're making a soup or something, and different things combined together have different effects. Darth Vader, one of the most iconic villains of all time, undeniably a bad guy, but he's so cool.
Well, and he's just many people's favorite character.
He's many people's favorite character.
Yeah, he's ranked at the top of almost every villain list.
Yeah, this is not a hateable villain. This is a villain you love. This is a villain you kind of want to dress up for Halloween, for Halloween, and I think I would love to talk sometime about, this is another topic, but about dark characters and what that is that satisfies. So I guess we just touched on it a little bit, is that there can be like that, they're an expression of something that's suppressed within us, maybe that like on some level we want to experience, but we can't because it's socially unacceptable.
Well,
so there's like a catharsis in being able to watch a dark character. Yeah.
Well, I think Vader is an unapologetic alpha. And I think there's a part of humanity that follows the alpha. So when you see someone who's not hiding it, he's not trying to be your friend, you're introduced to him, like there's this huge war. He just walks into it. He's not too concerned. Next time we see him, he's choking this guy. He's holding him off his feet and he throws him around like a rat. Like this guy's, you don't mess with this guy. You're either going to fight him or you're going to listen to him. And I also noticed, and I've appreciated this more as I've gotten older, about what makes Darth Vader work. The physicality of David Prowse. He is a very physical actor. And that was one thing I thought that was the problem with Hayden Christensen when they cast him. And he's grown on me, just to be fair. But Hayden Christensen definitely lacked the physicality of like David Prowse. And I thought that physicality was part of that alpha presence on screen that really hooked all of us. Vader, he's 100. It's all or nothing with this guy,
Yeah, and then Darth Vader also has some of these positive, respectable traits too. Like
competency. He doesn't lose.
He has competency. He has power over other people, and he has like magical power. And
superpowers. Yeah.
What'd you say?
Superpowers, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, superpowers.
Mm-hmm. So all that is fun. It's fun to watch him do that, right?
It is. Yeah, the hallway scene in Rogue One, which is new. It's a new addition to Star Wars, and yet it's on a lot of lists already for some of the most iconic scenes in all of Star Wars. And he's being absolutely ruthless.
Yeah,
people
James,
love it.
The more Star Wars that's produced, the more Anakin has become the protagonist of the entire saga, and the more tragic Vader has become as a result. Anakin really is that likable, and so as more time has passed, the less likely we are to release that love for Anakin, even when he becomes a literal genocidal maniac.
That's well said. I think that's completely accurate. That's a great analysis.
Wow.
Yeah, we've humanized him to the point where when we see Vader, we're like, oh, that's Anakin in this terrible, tragic scenario. We don't see just Vader anymore.
I don't. But Anakin, we've talked about this. Anakin, that was supposed to be Anakin's fall, and
that's a corruption arc that you guys discuss often.
But especially now that he was like back in Ahsoka being a good guy.
Yeah, it's so funny. I actually thought that the timeline didn't work out, but I was very disappointed in Anakin with Hayden Christensen as Anakin, because I just didn't think he had that linebacker physicality that Vader had. And I thought Chris Hemsworth actually would have made a good Anakin, because he actually looks like Jake Lloyd. Like Jake Lloyd looks like he could have grown up into like someone that looked like Chris Hemsworth. And Hemsworth had a much more of that physical presence that I thought would have been, a little bit more of Anakin. It would have been interesting to see a big guy like that as a Jedi, because then we would always see Vader when we look at Anakin. And I thought that was an opportunity missed.
All right. I think this last thing I already said, talking about horror characters that die, but we kind of enjoy seeing it happen. But I want to give another example of that, a specific one. That would be the movie. What's it called? I'm suddenly forgetting what it's called. It's the one with the people with the demons that have the like the pinhead guy. What is that?
Hellraiser?
Hellraiser, thank you. So Hellraiser is an example of, we set up these characters and we're indifferent / we dislike them. Like all of the main characters, we kind of sort of end up liking the final girl a little bit. That we do not feel empathy for most of the characters. The stuff that happens to them is kind of a comeuppance, and that's part of what that movie is accomplishing, right? It's like their sins are being paid for, kind of a thing. Like these are not very good people, and the horror that comes is like kind of entertaining to watch because they deserve it, right? So that's an example of how you don't always need to feel. You don't always need to feel sympathy for characters, but you need to know what it is you want the audiences to feel. And you can use these techniques to get them right at the point you want them to be.
One villain I always found interesting was Bill Cutting from Gangs of New York. He was a pretty ruthless, vicious, horrible guy, right? But he couldn't read or spell. And I remember analyzing him one time. He's like, "What's that word?" And he's like, "Ghoul." And he's like, "Ghoul, it's a good word." And I was like, interesting. I actually sympathize with him, because he's like an 8-year-old when it comes to reading. Suddenly you feel sorry for him, or that pity we were talking about. You're like, oh man, he can't read. It's such a simple task. He can't do this. So that was an example of a ruthless, terrible villain that you empathize with due to his lack of ability in doing something. So anyway, I thought of that a long time ago when analyzing why I liked him so much. Sorry, that's probably
All right.
completely.
You're good. No, that's great. All right, I've got one last slide. I want to give my own personal example of how I use these techniques.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. I was actually going to ask something about that. I was
Yeah,
going
'cause
to
I
ask you some examples of your characters. So this is good because this is in the published book. So this is
I was going to save this discussion for when we discuss this book later, but I'm going to go ahead and discuss it right now. Now, a little bit. Maybe we'll talk about it more later when people know who I'm talking about. But there's this character, Lucia, and in very early drafts. So this is another example of why I tend to. This actually happened a little bit with Dark Goddess too, Doug. The first draft of Kess wasn't quite right, and I had to use these techniques to dial her back. And
Okay,
yeah,
I get it. Yeah,
she was a little bit annoying at first. She was a little bit too
OP.
Sort of some of the changes that she goes through were there a little bit too early, and they had to be things that she became, if that makes sense. But
Okay.
Some of her negative arc, it was like some of the negativity was already there at the beginning, and I didn't mean for it to be. But with Lucia, again, I like to make characters that are a little bit rough around the edges sometimes. And the feedback that I got, I liked this character. I thought she was cool. I thought she was badass. You always like your own characters, right? But the feedback I got in early drafts was like, they're like, oh, I enjoyed these characters, except for Lucia. She was a real bitch. Like, this character was just so cold, and like, she was really mean. And like, I just didn't like her. And I was like, oh, okay. But I didn't change her. And I think this is important to note. I did not change this character's personality at all. But I tweaked the dials, and I gave her more humanity. So I instead of having her being like, she has this cold exterior, but I turned that into her coping mechanism as a sort of a mask for her own trauma, a way to pretend to be stronger than she really is. And I had more interiority from her point of view, so that we could see that. So we could see that was a mask that was actually hiding a lot of like very human relatable things.
Perfect.
Doubt, insecurity, fear, all these relatable things. But also, I let that mask slip a little bit when we were in other characters' points of view, so that we could still see that, seeing some of the softer sides of her that were underneath. So then, after I made those changes, guess what feedback I got instead? People started telling me, oh, guess what? My favorite character is Lucia. It's like night and day responses. Same basic person, but because I was very intentional about like, okay, well, let's bring back some more of this relatability. Let's bring back more of this humanity. Very different response. So that's a great way to like, I always think about character. Storytelling, of course, is iterative, but especially if you're taking risks, which I often do, just think about it that way. Like, you don't have to get it right the first time. Make sure you have people read your stuff that are honest, and then adjust. So that's my presentation.
I have a question. Why did you call it study case instead of case study?
Probably because it was the end of the day. My brain was not thinking very well. Yeah.
That's awesome that you got such a dramatic 180 on the reaction there.
I know. I thought that really.
That's a great way to show you how using techniques can really have a dramatic impact on your creative efforts.
Right.
Know the rules.
Yeah, know the rules, know what you're trying to do, and then work with it. Try to solve it.
I also should mention, I don't want to say too much because I want people to read it, but some of those things I mentioned earlier about cowardice and incompetence and how it changes, that stuff also applies to this character. So
interesting.
Yes, and some of the other characters. I'm done. You can take my screen off now if you want. Or I guess I have to stop sharing.
Well, I can just drop it. Yeah.
There we go.
Clutch segue. That was James Bacon. Well, that was awesome.
Yeah, that was. I thank you for taking us through that, Brianna.
Yeah.
I got to be honest. I have a confession. I thought this was going to be an almost overly simplistic conversation. So I was like, making characters, empathy, like a lot of this stuff seems kind of self-explanatory on some. Not at all. This ended up being a great and lively conversation. I very much enjoyed it. I thought it was awesome. Fantastic. And so thank you, Brianna. That was great. You really led a great discussion, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad that we've done it because there have been so many times in our past table talks where I've wanted to reference these things, and now I can. So
when Brianna says we're on a green asterisk, that means what? Respectability.
Right. Cool. Any
well,
other? Oh, I guess not. I was just looking to see if there are any other comments, but I think we're good.
Yes. Okay. Yes. People are also saying great, and please do like the stream. That was great. I guess I should. I forgot to have us introduce ourselves. I'm behind and tired today, which was all of that. So, but I think many of you know. But if you're still here with us, hey, first of all,
Hi.
get the Heroine's Labyrinth.
Well, let's start with City of Reckoning.
Oh, I have something to actually, if Forever is still here, I have an experiment to do on you guys.
Uh-oh. Are we the guinea pigs?
Should I? Well, it has to do with city. Are we going to do whose stuff are you bringing up first? We'll do it.
Well, I already brought that. I already had that one on the way.
Oh, there we go.
So, Doug, this is the place to go for your book. Tell them about it.
My name is Douglas Burton, and Douglas A. Burton, and I am the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, Archetypal Designs and Heroine-Led Fiction, as many of you know. And it just came out March 26th. Some of you have the book. Maybe some of you have started reading it. It took 4 years to write it. I came upon these ideas when writing my first novel, Faraway Bird, which was a real story about a Byzantine empress. Her story did not fit into the hero's journey, and it led me on this 4.5-year mission to find out if there was a recurrent pattern that heroines underwent. And lo and behold, I found 18 archetypal designs that recur in heroine-led fiction. And when I have shared them with people, when I've shared these archetypal designs with people, it has been met with very strong and positive responses. So I'm very encouraged by this. I hope when everyone reads it that you also really enjoy the book. We've covered the topics and archetypes here on the channel, but the book will get into some serious depth and discussion, which I would love to have again at some point in the future. So anyway, that's me, Douglas Avenue Burton. Now I hand it off to Brianna.
All right, Brianna, what is your test? Here is The City of Reckoning on Amazon.
So I have been thinking a lot about. Oh, thank you. We're doing it to each other's book. I've been thinking a lot about this book lately because I started writing the sequel recently that is in progress, and I want to change the way that my little one sentence way that I describe it to people. I have a new one, so I want to see what you guys think about it. I have to look it up. Hold on. All right. So City of Reckoning is an upper YA fantasy adventure novel about two young women, a girl with bat wings and claws hiding a terrible secret, and an elite female warrior haunted by a traumatic past. Both girls must rebel against an empire as they seek revenge against the powerful people that have abused them. It's a dark, violent epic about trauma, revolution, and the ethics of revenge.
Okay,
I like that.
I liked that. What is being replaced?
We used to say it's a story about a bunch of young people who get caught up in a war and begin to wonder if they're fighting for the wrong side. That's what I've always said before. And I'm not changing the blurb. I needed
this
better
isn't something that I thought it was something that was being replaced. Like
no, I just wanted to. That's the longer version. I'm going to do. I guess I have a single sentence version too. I'm still working out a little bit. So a single sentence version would be a girl with bat wings and an elite female warrior must rebel against an empire as they each seek revenge against the powerful people that have abused them. Because I keep talking about it being like about the ethics of war. I think I even put that in the blurb. And I don't think that's
even mentioned on Table Talk.
Yeah, it's about the ethics of revenge. I've been rereading the book and I'm like, I really think I can describe this better. So yeah, there's some other phrases I'd like to put in there, like rivals to friends, slow burn romance, female led. But anyway.
Well, what's funny is when you first finish it and then people are like, sell it. You come up with whatever you could come up with to sell it. And then later you read it, you're like, why would those all seem so cheap compared to like what you're talking about now? Like there's a better way to sell this. And it's a little bit more rooted in the book itself rather than the sensationalizing of it.
Yeah, I had a little bit more distance from it. And I just like, so anyway, but I don't know, what do you guys think? Did that sound like something?
I liked it a lot, actually.
I liked it a lot.
Sweet. I might end up actually using that in some marketing materials soon. So I'm going to do some.
Do you know how you could change? It takes about 24 to 72 hours, but you could change Amazon.
Oh, I will. I actually just changed the file this morning because I wanted to have a better blurb. Well, for the ebook, I'm not going to change the copy, the paperback yet, but I wanted to have a better thing at the back, linking people to my newsletter. But yeah, I am gonna tweak this a little bit because the other big thing is that I thought very carefully. It's very much a crossover novel, and I didn't know whether or not I wanted to it made sense to categorize it as YA or adult. I decided at the time to categorize it as adult. 3 years later, I've decided I made a mistake. This is definitely upper YA. So I'm going to recategorize it as that. Because yeah, if you don't like hearing teenagers talk about their feelings, you're not going to like my book. So I want to give people the right impression. This is about older teenagers. It's very much a coming of age story. So yep. So might as well give the right impression. And it's written in a style. The main reason why I didn't say YA is because the length is not a YA length, but
not at all.
The style is. So I
call it epic YA.
Epic. I think upper YA is like an industry term where it's not for 13-year-olds. It's for like 15, 16-year-olds.
No, not
and
upper.
Also people that are older, because lots of people read.
No, not upper. Epic YA.
I don't know if that's like an official term though.
No, you make it up yourself. Be like, this is YA. This is epic YA, which just justifies the length.
That's a good point. I just need to emphasize epic. I should put that higher up and like the bold part. I need to put
because what you're saying is this is YA on steroids. This is a big version of YA. Yeah. And I bet that there's a market for that actually.
No, I absolutely I absolutely think a teenager would enjoy this. So that was like a test for myself. I have my youngest cousin. I think she just turned 13, and she's great. We've been having a lot of conversation. She's into fantasy and stuff. And I was sitting there the other day being like, would she enjoy this book? Yes. Yes, she would, based on what. Yes. Yeah. So, yep. And of course, adults do too. It's a crossover novel. Like, it's very much for a lot of audiences. But yeah, anyway, that's my novel. So thanks for letting me test my new blurb on you guys.
Awesome.
And come by. We already talked about this, so I won't go over it more. But right now that we're launching The Cultist, videos are going out, episodes are going out. That's our mockumentary web show about modern day Lovecraftian cultists who just want to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who don't understand. And we're relaunching all of season 1 right now, coming out now. Next season 1, episode 6 will be out tomorrow on the channel. So if you are here and haven't subscribed, please do that. So you see all kinds of stuff that we're creating here.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you to everybody who has been here in the chat. This has been great. And everybody who will watch on replay, and please do comment. We read them and we'll respond and all of that. So it's been another great night here on Table Talk. I'm very glad we did this. Thank you, Brianna.
Yes. Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you for letting me do it. This was fun.
All right. Good night, everybody. See you later.
All right. Good
night.
night.
Be creative.